She owns $1 billion empire, but she hasn't looked at her own reflection in 3 years. He lost everything in a single phone call: his apartment, his plan, his footing, and found himself standing on a stranger's doorstep at 10 o'clock at night with a duffel bag and no backup option. What happened inside that house over the next 12 months will make you question everything you think you know about strength, about beauty, and about the kind of love that doesn't ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the very end. This one's worth it. The call came on a Tuesday, which was somehow the worst part. Not a Monday, when bad news at least had the decency to fit the mood of the day. A Tuesday. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of day a person makes coffee without thinking and checks emails on autopilot and assumes, without even realizing they're assuming, that the ground beneath their feet is solid. Liam Bennett was sitting in the parking lot of a sandwich shop in Seattle when his phone buzzed against the center console. He just unwrapped a turkey club he didn't really want because he'd forgotten to eat lunch, and it was already 4 in the afternoon. The name on the screen read Marcus Del Rey, his new landlord. The man who'd taken Liam's deposit check 6 weeks ago, shaken his hand, and told him the Portland apartment would be ready by the 1st of the month. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Bennett." Marcus's voice had that particular flatness people use when they already know the conversation is going to go badly. "I've been trying to reach you." "I was in a meeting. What's up?" A pause, the kind that fills itself with dread before a single word lands. "There's been a situation with the property." Liam stopped mid-bite. "What kind of situation?" "The building failed its fire inspection last week. The city's condemned the entire 3rd floor pending structural review. Your unit was on 3. Another pause. "I can't rent it to you. Legally, I can't rent it to anyone right now." For a moment, Liam just sat there, turkey club in hand, staring at a crow that was pecking at something on the asphalt 10 feet away. The crow looked completely unbothered by everything. Lucky crow. "The deposit," Liam said, "will be refunded in full within 10 business days." "I move in 9 days, Marcus." I understand that, and I'm sorry. I gave notice on my current place. My lease ends on the 31st. His voice stayed even. He'd learned a long time ago that losing his composure never actually helped anything. "My daughter is staying with my sister-in-law until I get settled. I start a new job on the 5th. "Mr. Bennett, I truly am sorry. This was outside my control." "Yeah." Liam set down the sandwich. "I know it was." He hung up. He sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He knew this because he watched the clock on the dashboard the whole time, for no reason except that he needed something to look at that wasn't the inside of his own head. Then he pulled up his email, found the confirmation for the Portland apartment he no longer had, and started making calls. The promotion had been unexpected, which was the charitable way to put it. The more honest version was that Liam had spent 4 years grinding away at Nexus Media Group, a mid-sized content development firm headquartered in Seattle, doing work that was consistently good and consistently overlooked, the way work often is when you're quiet and reliable and don't make a point of announcing your own value in meetings. He joined as a junior content strategist at 28, coming off a rough patch that included a divorce, a custody arrangement that required more legal fees than he'd had, and the particular kind of exhaustion that sets in when you're managing grief and a toddler simultaneously. He wasn't bitter about any of it. Or maybe he was, a little, in the small hours of the night when Nora was asleep and the apartment was quiet enough to think thoughts he usually kept moving too fast to catch. But bitterness had never struck him as a productive use of limited energy, and energy was something he'd been rationing carefully for the past 3 years. Nora was 5 now. She had her mother's dark curls and Liam's habit of frowning slightly when she was concentrating on something, and she referred to her stuffed elephant, a battered gray thing missing one eye, as Gerald, because she'd been going through a phase of giving things formal names. She was funny and particular and deeply opinionated about which cup she used for orange juice, and she was currently staying with Liam's sister-in-law, Carol, in Tacoma, which was the arrangement they'd made when the promotion came through, and Liam had 2 weeks to make decisions that normally would have taken 2 months. The promotion was real, and the opportunity was genuinely good, a senior content director role overseeing Nexus's newly opened Portland branch, a position that came with a meaningful salary increase and the kind of creative authority Liam had been working toward without ever quite saying so out loud. His manager, a sharp woman named Deborah Park, who did not give compliments unnecessarily, had sat him down and said, "You've been carrying more of this team than your title suggests for 2 years. Portland's yours if you want it." He'd asked for 24 hours to think it over. He'd called Carol that night. She was practical and warm in the particular way of someone who has weathered enough of life's nonsense to stop being surprised by it. "Take it," she said. "Nora can stay with us until you're settled. A month, maybe 6 weeks. She's fine. She loves it here. She's currently teaching Tyler how to conduct a trial against a houseplant, so she's fully occupied." "She's doing what?" "Your daughter is prosecuting a ficus. I'll explain later. Take the job, Liam." He took the job. And now he was sitting in a parking lot in Seattle with a condemned apartment and 9 days to find somewhere to live in a city he didn't yet know. Mugged. He spent the next 4 hours on his phone and laptop, working through every reasonable option with the systematic focus that had always been his survival mechanism. Short-term rentals were either already booked or priced at rates that made his eyes water. Hotels for 6 weeks would consume a significant portion of his savings. Subletting required more lead time than he had. Extended stay situations that fell within his budget were available mostly in locations that generated specific adjectives in their reviews. Words like colorful and lively and don't leave things in your car. It was his coworker Danny Reeves, a man who communicated primarily in text and had an almost supernatural ability to know people, who sent him the link at 9:30 that night. Found something weird but legit. Private room rental, Portland Heights, screen tenants only, month to month, utilities included. Posted this morning, rich part of town, serious underpriced. Catch. The owner's apparently selective. Like, very. Posted her own rules about who she'll rent to. Liam clicked the link. The listing was sparse, almost aggressively so. 3 photos. A bedroom that was clean and well furnished without being ostentatious. A shared kitchen. A private bathroom. The description was 4 sentences long. Private room in a large private residence. Month-to-month lease. Suitable for professional. No parties, no frequent guests, no exceptions. And then, in a separate line that stood slightly apart from the rest, this is a quiet home. Tenants who cannot respect that need not apply. The price was genuinely reasonable. Either something was wrong with it, or the owner genuinely didn't need the money and was renting for reasons that had nothing to do with financial necessity. He filled out the inquiry form. He wrote a short, honest paragraph about his situation. New job, temporary arrangement, single father, needed something stable for 6 to 8 weeks while he found permanent housing. He didn't oversell it. He sent it and put his phone down and went to sleep on his sister-in-law's couch because he'd driven to Tacoma to see Nora before the day completely collapsed. Nora had been asleep by the time he arrived, curled up in the guest room with Gerald the elephant and a nightlight shaped like a moon. He'd stood in the doorway for a minute, just watching her breathe, the way he sometimes did when the rest of the world felt like it was moving too fast and too loud, and he needed something to remind him what actually mattered. "She asked about you at dinner," Carol said softly from behind him. "What did she say?" "She said, 'Is Daddy building our new house?'" Carol smiled. "I told her you were working on it." Liam looked at his daughter sleeping. "Yeah," he said. "I'm working on it." Teat. The response came at 6:47 the following morning. He saw it before his alarm went off, which meant he'd slept the light, surface-level sleep of someone whose brain refused to fully power down. "Mr. Bennett, your inquiry has been reviewed. If you're available Thursday evening at 7, you may come for a walkthrough. The address will be provided upon confirmation. Please be prompt. V. Sterling, formal. Clipped. No warmth, but no hostility either. Just the tone of someone who had a precise way of doing things and expected the world to keep up. He confirmed immediately and got the address 20 minutes later. Thursday evening, he drove to Portland. Portland in late October had that particular quality of a city that knows autumn is its best season and leans into it without apology. The trees along the residential streets were doing dramatic things with color, reds and golds that looked almost artificially vivid against the gray of the overcast sky. Liam followed his GPS into a neighborhood that climbed the West Hills and grew quieter and more deliberate with every block, the houses set further back from the street, separated by mature landscaping that suggested decades of unhurried growth. The Sterling residence was at the end of a private lane, set behind a stone wall and a gate that opened automatically when he pulled up to the intercom and gave his name. The house itself was large without being aggressive about it. 3 stories of dark stone and glass and old timber, surrounded by Douglas firs that made the whole property feel like it existed slightly outside of ordinary time. There were lights on in the upper windows and one on the ground floor, but the overall impression was of a house that kept its presence to itself. He parked, grabbed his jacket from the back seat, and walked to the front door. Rang the bell. He waited longer than he expected, long enough that he wondered if he'd gotten the time wrong, or if this was some kind of test, or if the whole thing was simply a wash. He was just reaching for his phone to check the email again when the door opened. The woman who opened it was not what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said afterward exactly what he had expected. She was around his age, maybe a year or 2 younger, with dark auburn hair pulled back severely from her face and sharp, watchful gray eyes that assessed him with a precision that reminded him, oddly, of a photograph being taken. She wore a dark blazer over a simple black shirt, and she stood in the doorway with her weight slightly turned, her left hand gripping the doorframe in a way that angled her face, the left side of her face, away from the exterior light. He noticed, in the way a person notices something they're actively trying not to make obvious that they've noticed, the scar. It ran from just below her left eye down along the line of her jaw. Not jagged, but definite, the kind of mark that didn't fade with time or foundation. It was the first thing the light touched when she shifted, and it was clearly the first thing she expected people to react to because she was watching him with the careful, braced stillness of someone waiting for a flinch. He didn't flinch. "Mr. Bennett," she said. Not a question. "Ms. Sterling." He extended his hand. "Liam, thanks for seeing me." She shook it, briefly, businesslike. "Come in." "Just sit." The interior of the house was quieter than anywhere Liam had been in recent memory. Not empty quiet, but intentionally quiet, the way spaces get when someone has arranged them to enforce a certain stillness. The entry hall had high ceilings and warm wood floors and very few decorative objects, but the ones present were deliberate. A single large painting, abstract and mostly blue, on the wall opposite the stairs. A narrow side table with a ceramic lamp and nothing else. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be, with no concession to clutter or accident. She led him through the hall and into the kitchen, which was large and well-equipped and showed signs of actual use. A coffee maker with a half-filled carafe, a notebook open on the kitchen island beside a pen, 2 unwashed mugs in the sink. Small things, humanizing things. The rest of the house was so composed that the unwashed mugs felt almost like a confession. "The room is upstairs," she said. "I'll show you in a moment. First, I have questions." "Go ahead." She stood on the opposite side of the island, both hands flat on the surface, and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd arrived. Whatever she was looking for, she looked for it carefully. "Your inquiry mentioned a temporary arrangement, 6 to 8 weeks. "That's right. I'm starting at Nexus Media's Portland branch on the 5th. I need time to find a permanent place. I have a daughter. She's 5. She's staying with family in Tacoma until I'm settled." "The child would not be living here during that period." "No, not yet. Once I find my own place, yes. But during this arrangement, no." She nodded. "I work from home, primarily. The upper floors are my workspace as well as my living space. I keep irregular hours. I don't require conversation." A pause. "I've had tenants before who found the arrangement difficult." What made it difficult for them? The question seemed to catch her slightly off guard. She'd expected him to simply absorb the information, not push back on it. "I have expectations about how this house operates. Not everyone adjusts well to that." "What are the expectations?" She studied him for a moment. "Quiet hours after 10. Guests, if any, require advance notice, and overnight guests are not permitted without a conversation first. The kitchen is shared. I expect it to be left as it was found. I have a specific schedule for the week, and I don't want that schedule disrupted by noise or activity I haven't anticipated. She paused again. And I don't socialize. If you're looking for a roommate situation, that's not what this is. I'm not looking for a roommate situation, Liam said. I'm looking for a place to sleep and work from in the evenings. I'm going to be at the office most of the day, and I have enough going on that I won't be underfoot. She considered this. Her fingers drummed once on the island, a small, perhaps unconscious movement, and then stilled. Why did your original arrangement fall through? She asked. You said in the inquiry the apartment wasn't available, but you didn't explain why. Building failed its fire inspection. Third floor was condemned. The landlord couldn't legally rent the unit. He's refunding my deposit, which doesn't really help me find a place to live in 9 days. You could have found a hotel. I looked. For the length of time I'd need, and in the price range that doesn't derail my finances before I've even started the new job, the options weren't great. So this is a pragmatic choice. Mostly, yeah, but also, he paused, choosing the next words carefully. The listing felt honest, like whoever wrote it wasn't trying to sell anything. That matters to me. She looked at him for a long moment. He had the distinct impression that she was running some internal calculation that he wasn't privy to. I'll show you the room, she said. There. The room was on the second floor, at the end of a short hallway, with a window that faced the back garden and a private bathroom that was larger than he'd expected. The furniture was minimal and good. A queen bed with a dark wood frame, a desk and chair positioned near the window, a low dresser, and a reading lamp that threw clean, warm light. The closet was a decent size. The window looked out into Douglas firs and the distant glitter of the city through the trees. It's a good room, Liam said, meaning it. Yes, she said simply. She stood in the doorway, not fully entering, which he noticed but didn't comment on. The lease is month to month, standard deposit, first month's rent, standard terms. If either party wants to end the arrangement, 2 weeks' notice is sufficient. That works. There's one more thing. Her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but differently weighted. People tend to make assumptions about this house, about me. I'm telling you in advance, I don't discuss my personal life, my work beyond what's necessary, or my appearance. Not because I'm fragile. The word landed with a kind of deliberately placed firmness. But because those conversations don't produce anything useful, and I find them exhausting. He met her eyes. I'm not going to talk about your scar, Ms. Sterling. The words hung there. He'd said the thing both of them had been dancing around, and now it was in the air between them, and she was very still. Then something almost imperceptible shifted in her expression. Not quite relief, not quite surprise. Something that didn't have a clean name. Good, she said. Then we may get along. He moved in on a Friday. He'd packed efficiently. A man who'd learned to travel light through years of necessary adaptation. 2 large bags, a laptop, a box of things Nora had insisted he take with him for luck, a crayon drawing of their family she'd made the previous winter, a small smooth stone she'd found at the beach and declared protective, and Gerald's original spare button eye, which she'd given him with immense seriousness because she said the apartment needed a guardian. He set the stone on the windowsill. He put the drawing face up on the desk, not for decoration, but because looking at it helped him think. Victoria Sterling did not appear when he arrived. She'd left the key under the mat with a handwritten note on index card, the handwriting very precise, slightly angular, that said, "Spare key enclosed. Wi-Fi password on the router, which is in the cabinet below the kitchen sink. I'll be unavailable until evening. VS." Which was fine. He didn't need a welcome committee. He unpacked, made himself coffee with his travel French press because he didn't want to immediately colonize her coffee maker, and sat at the desk looking out at the garden and the trees and the early November light going pale and thin through the canopy. He called Nora. "Daddy, Gerald said the stone is working." She was deeply serious about this. "He said he can feel it from here." "Gerald has excellent range," Liam said. "How is the new house?" He looked around the room, the clean lines, the warm lamp, the sound of nothing except wind in the firs outside. "It's quiet," he said. "Is quiet good?" He thought about it honestly. Yeah, Bug. I think quiet is exactly what we need right now. Sit. He met Victoria properly, or more accurately, in a situation that required actual sustained conversation, on his third day in the house, a Sunday, when they both ended up in the kitchen at 7 in the morning with the particular mutual awkwardness of two people who have established no rhythm with each other yet. She was already at the island when he came downstairs, standing with a mug of coffee and a tablet she was reading from, dressed in dark trousers and a light gray sweater, her hair down for once. She glanced up when he came in. "Morning," Liam said. "Morning." She returned to the tablet. He made coffee, from her machine this time, because it had been 3 days and it seemed needlessly ceremonial to keep making his own, and leaned against the counter and looked out the kitchen window at the garden, where a family of Steller's jays was conducting what appeared to be a territorial dispute in one of the furs. "Two of them have been fighting over that particular branch since I moved in," he said. "I'm rooting for the smaller one." A pause. She didn't look up. "The smaller one always loses." "Not always." She did look up then briefly. Something in her expression registered the mild argument without quite committing to a response. She looked back at the tablet. "What are you reading?" he asked. Not intrusively, just ordinarily, the way people ask ordinary things in kitchens in the morning. Another pause, slightly longer. "A manuscript. I'm deciding whether to acquire it." "Publishing?" "Yes." He nodded, poured his coffee. "What's it about?" This time the pause was long enough that he thought she'd simply decided not to answer. He didn't push. He was watching the jays. The smaller one had been displaced from the branch and was making a lot of noise about it from a lower position. "It's about a woman who survives something and spends the rest of the book trying to figure out if surviving is the same as living," Victoria said finally to her tablet. "The writing is extraordinary. The structure is a mess. Are you going to acquire it?" "Probably." She set the tablet down. "I'll have to work with the author on the structure. She'll resist it. They usually do." "Do they come around?" "The good ones do." He looked at her. She was looking at the window now. The jays, specifically. The smaller one had made another run at the branch. "See," Liam said, "he's persistent." Persistence and success are different things. Sure. But persistence is how you get to the point where success becomes possible. She looked at him then with an expression he couldn't fully categorize. Not quite skeptical, not quite intrigued. Somewhere in between. Like she was deciding whether or not the conversation was worth continuing. "You're optimistic," she said. It wasn't quite a compliment and wasn't quite a criticism. "I'm practical," he said. "There's a difference." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the idea of a smile, briefly considered and then set aside. She picked up her tablet. He drank his coffee. Outside, the smaller jay had retaken the branch. Mess up. He'd done research before he moved in. Not invasively, not more than any reasonable person would do before moving into a stranger's house. But he'd Googled Victoria Sterling, and what had come back was considerable. Forbes profiles from 5 years ago. Industry publications listing Sterling House among the most influential independent publishers in the country, celebrated for its literary fiction list and its fierce protection of author creative vision. A photograph from an industry gala, 7 years old, showing a young woman in a black dress who looked directly into the camera with the particular ease of someone who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of being looked at. After that photograph, her public presence dropped sharply. No new photos. No public appearances logged. Sterling House continued to grow, to publish award-winning books, to break new authors and anchor established ones. But Victoria Sterling herself receded from view, replaced by statements and by the work itself. He hadn't found direct information about the accident. Just a brief mention in a profile piece from 4 years ago. Sterling, who stepped back from public appearances following a personal matter in 2020, continues to guide the company with personal matter, the two most efficient words in the English language for erasing the truth of something. He hadn't looked further. It wasn't his information to have. What? By the end of the second week, they'd settled into a loose but functional coexistence. She worked upstairs until mid-afternoon, then often moved to the kitchen or the study on the ground floor. He was at the Nexus office most of the day, getting his feet under him in the new role, which was demanding in the good, absorbing way that kept his mind occupied and off the slightly unreal feeling of his life currently. He came home in the evenings to a quiet house that smelled like coffee, or occasionally, whatever she'd cooked. She was, he noted, a precise and competent cook who used the kitchen without waste or excess. They talked sometimes, not much, and not about anything that required vulnerability. She asked about Nexus once, with the detached curiosity of someone who consumes information from everything around them, and he explained what content strategy actually meant in practical terms, which led to a genuine back and forth about the difference between content designed to perform and content designed to endure, which was a subject she had strong and specific opinions about. He found this interesting. He pushed back on a few of her points in a way that was direct without being combative, and she engaged with the pushback rather than retreating from it, which he filed away as something worth noting. She read constantly. He'd see books left on various surfaces, novels, nonfiction, the occasional poetry collection, opened and face down, which he suspected would have horrified their spines if spines had feelings. He mentioned this once. "I know where I am in the book," she said, not looking up from whatever she was reading. "You could use a bookmark." "I don't like bookmarks." "Why?" She looked up. "Because a bookmark is an admission that you're leaving." He thought about that for a moment. "That's a very specific objection." "I have specific objections to most things." "I've noticed." This time the almost smile was slightly more present. Still not quite real, but closer. The first time he saw her in the grip of genuine difficulty was a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks in. He'd come home late, a project meeting that ran long, and found the kitchen light on at 11 p.m., which was unusual. He set down his bag and went to the kitchen and found Victoria at the island, standing very still, staring at her phone. She didn't look up when he came in. On the counter in front of her was an opened envelope and a printed card. He could see the text from across the room. Blackwood Publishing Summit. You are invited. An industry event. He recognized the name. It was significant. "Bad news?" he said, before he'd quite decided whether to say anything. She looked up then. There was something tight in her expression. Not anger, but the face a person makes when they've been braced for a long time and the bracing is beginning to take its toll. "An invitation," she said. "To the Blackwood Summit?" She looked at him sharply. "You know it?" "I know of it. My boss mentioned it last week. Big deal in publishing and media." "Yes." She set the phone down. "It is." He waited. She didn't volunteer anything else, but she also didn't leave the kitchen, which he took as meaning something. "You're not going to go," he said. Not a judgment, just a reading of the room. Her jaw tightened fractionally. "There are over 300 people attending, industry figures, investors, international partners. She stopped. "It's a room full of people who'd be looking at you," he said. The words were direct, and she went very still for a moment. Then, slowly, some tension released from her shoulders. "Yes," she said, very quietly. "That's exactly what it is." He didn't say anything immediately. He went to the cabinet and got a glass of water and thought about it. Not performing thoughtfulness, but actually thinking. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "What would you present if you went? What would you actually be there to talk about?" She looked at him with the slightly guarded expression she wore when a conversation went somewhere she hadn't anticipated. "Sterling House is launching a new imprint in January. It would be the natural venue to announce it. There are 3 potential partnership conversations I've been deferring for months because they want a face-to-face. And the keynote slot they're offering..." She stopped again. "What's the keynote?" "The future of independent publishing." She said it flatly, like she was reading a weather report. "Which is arguably a topic I understand better than most people in that room." "So you'd be the right person to give it?" "Yes." "But you're not going to." A pause. These events..." She stopped a third time, and he watched her visibly struggle with something, and then make the decision not to struggle with it in front of him, which was a kind of retreat, and he recognized it as such. "I don't do well in that kind of setting anymore." "Anymore," he repeated carefully. "It wasn't always this way," she said, with a precision that suggested she was being very deliberate about exactly how much she was saying. "I used to..." A breath. It's been a long time since I've been in a room like that. There are reasons for that. I know, he said, or I know enough. She looked at him, and for a moment there was something naked in her expression, something that sat underneath the composure she'd built and maintained with such visible effort, something that looked a lot like exhaustion, not the tiredness of being overworked. The deeper tiredness of being someone who has been managing other people's perceptions for so long that managing them has become the job. You don't have to decide tonight, Liam said. The RSVP deadline is Friday. Okay, so you have until Friday. He picked up his bag from where he'd set it on the counter. For what it's worth, and I know it's not my call, it seems like a shame to have something worth saying and not say it. He went upstairs. She was still in the kitchen when he came back down at midnight for the glass of water he'd forgotten. She was at the island again, but now she had a notebook open, and she was writing, not slowly, not carefully, the kind of writing that happens when the thinking has broken open and the hand is just trying to keep up. She didn't look up. He got his water. He didn't say anything. He went back upstairs and thought, for no particular reason, that the woman in that kitchen was considerably more interesting than most people would ever know. The following Friday, she told him she'd sent in her RSVP. She said it in passing, in the kitchen, in the morning, without looking at him. The same way she'd delivered most important information so far, like it was incidental, like it had barely registered. The event's in 3 weeks, she added. Okay, he said. She poured her coffee. He poured his. Outside, both jays had relocated to a different tree, and the contested branch was empty. She stopped, started again. If I need someone to accompany me to the event, that would be, she frowned at her coffee. That would be useful. He looked at her. Are you asking me to come with you? She looked back at him. I'm noting that it would be useful if someone accompanied me. What you infer from that is your business. Victoria. She looked up. I'll go, he said. She nodded once, looked back at her coffee, said nothing else. But she didn't leave the kitchen either, and they stood there for a few minutes in a quiet that had, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, stopped feeling like the silence between strangers and started feeling like something else entirely. Something neither of them had a word for yet, and neither of them tried to name. The trees moved in the wind outside the window. Somewhere in the firs, one of the jays called out, short, declarative, certain of itself. Liam drank his coffee. Victoria read her manuscript. The morning went on. 3 weeks was long enough to learn the rhythms of a person without meaning to. Liam hadn't set out to map Victoria Sterling's daily patterns. It happened the way most things happen when you share a living space with someone. Gradually, without ceremony. The way water finds the shape of whatever contains it. He learned that she was up before 6 every morning, that she drank her first cup of coffee standing at the kitchen window regardless of the weather, that she had a habit of leaving her reading glasses on top of the refrigerator and then spending 10 minutes looking for them, which was the single most relatable thing about her. He learned that she worked in intense, concentrated blocks, 3, sometimes 4 hours at a stretch, without coming downstairs, and that when she finally did emerge, she moved through the kitchen with the slightly dazed quality of someone returning from a long way away. He learned that she ate lunch late, almost always at the island with a manuscript or tablet, and that she had strong and specific opinions about tea, but made it badly every time, steeping it too long until it went bitter, and then drinking it anyway without complaint. He did not learn these things by asking. He learned them by being present and paying attention, which was different. She was also, he was increasingly certain, paying attention to him, though she did it in the particular way of someone who has decided that being caught looking is worse than not looking at all. He'd catch her watching him sometimes, when he was on a work call at the kitchen table, or when he was cooking something on the rare evenings he felt like actually cooking, and when their eyes met, she'd shift her gaze with a smoothness that might have fooled someone less observant. It didn't fool him, but he didn't say anything. He filed it away with the reading glasses and the oversteeped tea in the mental folder labeled Things I Know About Victoria Sterling That She Hasn't Told Me. The folder was getting full. What he didn't yet know, what she hadn't told him, And what the internet's carefully curated gaps hadn't filled in was the actual shape of what had happened to her. He knew the outline, the accident, the scar, the withdrawal from public life that had turned from temporary to permanent without apparently anyone quite deciding that it should. He knew the 5 years of sustained invisibility, the industry that had kept its distance without understanding why, the rumors that had accumulated in the vacuum that public silence always creates. He knew all of this the way you know the outside of a building, the structure, the facade, the impression it makes from the street. But the interior was still entirely hers. He didn't push. He was not by nature a pusher. Some people mistook this quality for passivity, and they were wrong. Liam was one of the more deliberate people he knew, and the not pushing was as deliberate as anything else. He had a daughter who needed space to figure out what she wanted to say before she said it, and he'd learned early in her short life that the best way to hear someone was to leave enough silence for them to fill it on their own terms. The same principle, he found, applied more broadly than parenthood. Still, the 3 weeks had changed something in the texture of the house, some quality of the air between them. It was subtle, and it might have been nothing. Might have been ordinary familiarity, the mundane result of people sharing a kitchen long enough to stop performing around each other. But Liam had the distinct and somewhat uncomfortable sense that it was not nothing, and that Victoria Sterling, whatever she might project to the contrary, knew it too. It was a Tuesday when she came downstairs at 2 in the afternoon wearing a look he hadn't seen from her before. Not distress exactly, but something adjacent to it. A tightness around the eyes that suggested a morning that had not gone as intended. She went directly to the coffee maker, which was empty because it was well past reasonable coffee hours, and stood there holding the empty carafe for a moment like she'd forgotten what she was doing. "There's water still hot in the kettle," Liam said from the table, where he'd been working from home that afternoon because a call with the Seattle office had run late and he'd never made it into the Nexus offices. She turned and looked at him, apparently having not registered that he was in the room. "Tea's on the second shelf," he added. She didn't say anything. She set down the carafe, got the kettle, found a mug. He watched her put in 3 minutes too much steep time, as always, and said nothing about it, as always. She sat down at the island, not at the far end, which was where she usually positioned herself when he was at the table, closer to the middle. He noticed this without looking like he noticed it. "Difficult morning?" he said, not looking up from his laptop. "Author call." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Marcus Hale. Do you know his work?" "I've read The Salt Flats, thought it was remarkable." She looked up. "Did you?" "Yeah, the structure was unusual. Took me a while to get my footing in it. But by the 3rd section, I was completely in. The ending undid me a little." "He's working on something new," she said. "Or he's supposed to be. What he's actually doing is calling me every 3 days to tell me why the book he's writing is not the book he should be writing, and proposing that we delay the delivery date while he figures out what the actual book is." "Can you delay it?" "Contractually, yes. I have that flexibility. That's not the problem." She drank her tea, made a face. Drank more anyway. "The problem is that he's right. The book he's describing to me, the one underneath the one he's writing, that's the better book. I know it. He knows it. But he's been working on the current version for 2 years, and asking him to set it aside and start over is asking him to do something genuinely brutal." "What do you tell him?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." She set down the mug. "I could tell him the book he has is fine. That fine is enough. That we'll publish it, and it will do reasonably well, and he can write the other one next. Which is true. Or I can tell him what I actually think. Which is," she looked at him steadily, "that fine is the worst thing that happens to a writer. That publishing a book you knew wasn't the right book will stay with him longer than the difficulty of writing the one that is." "That's harder to hear." "Yes. But you're going to say it anyway." "I already said it." She picked up the mug again. "That's why the call was difficult." He looked at her. He didn't take it well. He took it exactly as well as the truth usually gets taken, which is to say he was upset, and then quiet, and then he said he needed a few days, and then he hung up. "And now you're sitting here wondering if you did the right thing." A pause. "I know I did the right thing," she said. "I'm wondering if it was also the kind thing." Liam closed his laptop. "In my experience, Those two things aren't always the same, but I think when someone is capable of the better version, telling them so is both, even when it hurts. She looked at him for a moment, not the assessing look she'd used in those first weeks, something quieter than that. You have an opinion on everything, she said, but there was nothing sharp in it. Not everything, he said. Your tea steeping is objectively wrong, and I've kept my opinion on that to myself for 3 weeks. This time, the almost smile arrived and stayed for a full 2 seconds before she recalled it. It's fine, she said. It's bitter. I like it bitter. No one likes it bitter. I do. You make a face every time you drink it. That's my normal face. He laughed. A genuine one, not performed, not managing the moment. Just a laugh. And she looked at him when he laughed with an expression that was hard to name and didn't try to be anything else. And then she looked away and picked up her tablet, and the kitchen settled back into its particular quiet, and Liam opened his laptop again. But something had shifted fractionally in the space between them. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. Just the way a door that's been slightly stuck will sometimes ease open on its own if you give it enough time and the temperature changes by the right amount. He was learning, slowly, that this was how Victoria Sterling worked. Not in declarations or grand gestures or the kind of openness that announces itself. In fractions. In moments she allowed and then immediately contextualized and moved away from. In the tea she drank wrong every time, and the glasses she left on top of the refrigerator, and the way she sometimes stopped in the middle of a sentence, not because she'd lost her thought, but because she'd decided, mid-thought, how much of it to give. It was a complicated way to live. He suspected she knew that. He also suspected she didn't know how to live any other way, and had been in that position for long enough that the shape of it felt permanent to her. He wanted to tell her that it didn't have to be, but he understood, with the particular patience of someone who has done his own version of this, that saying that to someone who isn't ready to hear it accomplishes nothing except making them feel accused. So he kept that thought where he kept the tea opinion, noted, held, not deployed. The kettle sat on the counter. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window at a low November angle, and the furs moved slowly outside, and Marcus Hale was presumably somewhere figuring out how to write the better book. Liam Bennett got back to work. That was the Tuesday. The Thursday after that was when he found out about the accident. He hadn't gone looking. He needed to underscore that. He genuinely had not gone looking, had made a deliberate choice not to dig past what had come up naturally in his initial research. But he was at the Nexus office, sitting across from his colleague Priya Nair during a lunch break. And Priya, who had grown up in Portland and had a comprehensive knowledge of local industry history, had asked him casually where he was living while he got settled. He said, without thinking much of it, that he'd found a room rental in Portland Heights. Oh yeah? Who with? Victoria Sterling. Priya's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Victoria Sterling. Sterling House. That Victoria Sterling? You know her? I mean, not personally, but yeah. She's kind of legendary around here, in publishing specifically. She built Sterling House from basically nothing into what it is now, all before she was 30. Priya set down her fork. She kind of disappeared from the scene a few years ago, after the accident. Liam was quiet for a moment. What accident? Priya looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. You don't know? I know there was one. I haven't asked her about it. Her car was hit by a truck. On I-84, I think. About 5 years ago. She was on her way back from an author event in Hood River. Priya picked up her fork again, more carefully this time. She was in the hospital for like 2 weeks. There was a lot of damage, the facial scarring and some other stuff, I think. And then she just pulled back from everything. Stopped doing public appearances, stopped doing interviews. The company kept running. It runs fine, obviously, but she sort of went invisible. A pause. She had this boyfriend at the time, too. Industry guy, I forget his name. Apparently he was pretty publicly not great about the whole thing. Liam looked at his food. Not great how? Priya hesitated. There was some stuff that came out later. I heard it secondhand from someone at her publishing house. He apparently, didn't stick around. And before he left, He said some things that were... She shook her head. I don't know the specifics, but the word I heard was cruel, and it was right when she was still recovering, so... She shrugged the kind of shrug that carries weight. People, right? He drove home that evening slightly differently than he normally drove, a little more focused, a little more somewhere other than the usual logistics of his head. Not with pity. He was deliberate about that because pity was exactly what she didn't want, and had said so plainly, and besides, pity was a kind of distance. It put the person feeling it in a removed position, safe from whatever they were pitying, and Liam didn't want to be at a remove from Victoria Sterling. He just wanted to understand more of the shape of things. A car accident on a highway. 5 years of rebuilding a life, around an injury that never let you forget it. A man who left when it got hard. A house that became a fortress, not because she wanted isolation, but because isolation had offered protection when people proved they couldn't be trusted with her vulnerability. He thought about the manuscript she'd told him about, the woman who survives something and spends the rest of the book trying to figure out if surviving is the same as living. He thought about Victoria saying she was probably going to acquire it. He went home. She was in the kitchen when he arrived, standing at the stove with a pan of something that smelled like garlic and herbs, her hair twisted up and a dish towel over her shoulder. She glanced at him when he came in. "There's enough if you haven't eaten," she said. He hadn't eaten. "Thanks." He set down his bag and got 2 glasses of water without being asked, because it had become one of those small, unconscious habits that established itself at some point. He brought water. She made the coffee. The territory was understood without anyone mapping it. He set a glass beside the stove and she glanced at it and then at him, briefly, and said nothing, which was her version of thank you. The food was pasta with some kind of white wine and herb sauce and roasted cherry tomatoes, made with the same precision she applied to everything, nothing wasted or accidental. They ate at the island. They'd mostly abandoned the table by that point. It was too formal for the rhythm they'd developed. And he asked her about a project she'd mentioned to him the week before, a debut novelist she was particularly invested in, and she talked about it with the restrained but unmistakable energy she got when something captured her attention, which was one of the things he'd noticed. That passion for Victoria Sterling didn't announce itself. It leaked around the edges of her composure when she couldn't quite contain it. "She's 26, Victoria said. "First book. No agent initially. She submitted directly to our open submissions. My assistant almost passed on it because the cover letter was a disaster, completely undersold the work." "But you read it." "I read everything that gets past the first screen. We're a small enough house that I still can." She speared a cherry tomato. "When I got to page 40, I called the assistant and told her to send a request immediately." "What's it about?" "A Filipino family across 3 generations, told through the women. The grandmother's sections are in fragmented non-linear time, which sounds difficult, and it is, but she controls it with extraordinary precision. The emotional continuity underneath the structure is..." She stopped, looked for the word. "It's devastating. In the correct way." "In the correct way," he repeated. "Devastating, that earns it," she said, with the certainty of someone who has read enough to know the difference. "Devastating that comes from truth rather than manipulation. They're not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "They're not." She was quiet for a moment, eating, then, "She sent me a letter when we made the offer, handwritten, 3 pages. She wrote about what it meant to have someone see the book for what it was trying to do, rather than what it failed at." A pause. "Most letters like that go in a drawer. I've kept that one on my desk for 4 months." Liam looked at her. "Why?" She considered the question with the slight delay she always took before answering anything that touched something real. "Because it reminded me why I do this, which is occasionally necessary." He thought about the event invitation still sitting on her desk upstairs, the keynote she'd been offered, the partnership conversations she'd been deferring. "Victoria," he said. She looked up. "Can I ask you something that you're allowed to not answer?" Her expression shifted slightly. Not closing, exactly, but bracing. "You can ask." "The Blackwood Summit. Why did you agree to go?" The bracing in her expression became more visible. She set down her fork, looked at the island surface for a moment, then back at him. "Why do you ask?" "Because you've been... I don't know. Not different exactly, but something. He was choosing his words carefully, not because he was afraid of her reaction, but because he genuinely wanted to get it right. Since you sent the RSVP, there's something working behind your eyes that wasn't there before. I don't know if it's preparation or dread or both. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might redirect. Then she said, "Both." "Okay." "I agreed to go because—" She stopped, tried again. Sterling House is at a point where the next partnership decisions will define the next decade. These are conversations I've been avoiding because they require me to be physically present in rooms with people who will look at me. A pause that carried weight. I've been using remote work and representatives as a substitute for myself. It's worked up to a point. The point is approximately now. "So it's not a choice anymore," he said. "It's a necessity." "It's both. I could continue as I have been. The company would survive it, but it wouldn't grow in the ways it should, and I know that, and I've known it, and I've been—" She stopped. Waiting for it to stop being scary? She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between irritation and recognition. "That's reductive. Is it wrong?" A long pause. "No," she said finally. "It's not wrong." He nodded, didn't say anything else on the subject, picked up his fork. After a moment, she picked up hers. "The keynote," she said quietly to her plate. "I know what I want to say. I've known what I would say about independent publishing for years. The ideas are there." A breath. "It's the saying of them in front of 300 people that becomes—" She stopped again. "An act of exposure," he said. She looked up. "Yes, exactly that." "That's different from public speaking fear," he said. "That's something else." "Yes." Her voice was even, but there was something raw underneath it. Something she was managing the way she managed everything, with precision, with visible effort. When you've been looked at and found, she paused, choosing the word with great care. Diminished. When that has happened and the person doing it is someone who was supposed to— She stopped completely, looked at the island, started again from a different angle. Standing in front of strangers is one thing, but it's not really about the strangers. He understood what she wasn't saying. He understood it well enough that he didn't need her to say it, and he thought she knew that, which might have been why she'd said as much as she had. "You're not what he said you were," Liam said. Carefully, plainly, without making it into more than it needed to be. Whoever he was, whatever he said. Victoria was very still. "I know that," she said. "Knowing and—" She looked for the end of the sentence. "Knowing is one thing. The rest of it is slower." "Yeah," he said. "It usually is." They sat with that for a moment, not uncomfortably. The silence between them had a quality now that didn't require management. He'd noticed that too. "You said something," she said eventually, "a few weeks ago, that having something worth saying and not saying it is a shame." She looked at him. "I've thought about that a fair amount." "Have you?" "It annoyed me," she said, with a directness that was almost funny, which is usually a sign that something has landed correctly. "I'll take that as a compliment. Take it however you want." But there was something in her voice that was close to warmth, not quite there yet, but approaching. He gathered the dishes. She didn't tell him he didn't have to. He rinsed them without being asked. She watched him for a moment from her side of the island, and then she closed her tablet and picked up the thin stack of manuscript pages she'd brought down with her. She was always carrying manuscript pages somewhere, and seemed about to head upstairs. "Liam," she said from the kitchen doorway. He turned. "Why did you say yes? To coming to the event?" He considered the question. Not the easy version of it, not the polite, efficient answer, but the honest one. "Because you asked, or something close to asking." "That's all?" "No," he said. "But it's the largest part." She looked at him for a moment, with that look she had that he still couldn't fully decode, that sat somewhere between guarded and curious. Then she nodded once. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Victoria." She went upstairs. He stood at the sink for a moment, looking at the dark window and the firs beyond it, moving slightly in the night wind. He thought about a 26-year-old woman writing a letter that ended up on Victoria Sterling's desk for 4 months. He thought about what it meant to be seen for what you were actually trying to do. He thought about how some things took a long time and couldn't be rushed, and how the rushing of them was precisely what caused them to collapse. His phone buzzed, a text from Carol in Tacoma. "Nora made you a new drawing. Gerald helped, apparently. Should I send a photo?" He typed back, "Always." The photo came 30 seconds later, a crayon rendering of a house with large windows and a lot of trees, 2 stick figures standing outside it, one small and one tall, and at the top in Nora's extremely confident 5-year-old handwriting, "Daddy's new house." He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. The event was in 10 days. Somewhere in this house, Victoria Sterling was probably still awake, probably reading, probably steeping her tea exactly long enough to make it taste like something that punished you for wanting comfort. He had no particular plan, no strategy, no intention of becoming anything to her beyond what the situation had made him. He just knew that she'd sent that RSVP and that she was preparing herself for something that terrified her, and that she'd told him more in that kitchen tonight than she'd probably intended to. And he knew, without making too much of it, that he was glad he was here. In this quiet house, with the trees outside and the jays and the 2 bitter tea and the manuscript pages on every surface and the woman who moved through it all with the careful precision of someone who'd had to rebuild herself around the fact that she could be broken. He was glad he hadn't found another place to stay. He hadn't examined that thought too closely. He had a feeling that was wise. He went to sleep. The 10 days before the Blackwood Summit passed the way the days before anything significant tend to pass. Too quickly, in the practical sense, and too slowly, in every other. Liam watched Victoria prepare with the particular focus of someone who has decided to do a hard thing and is now in the process of making peace with having decided it. She didn't talk about the event constantly. She didn't work herself into visible anxiety or fill the house with nervous energy. She did something more controlled and, he thought, more difficult than either of those things. She simply kept working, kept taking calls, kept reading manuscripts, kept sending her precise handwritten notes on index cards that she apparently still mailed to authors because she believed email lacked appropriate weight for certain communications. She prepared her keynote speech in the early mornings, before he was usually awake, and he only knew this because he came downstairs earlier than usual one Thursday to find her at the kitchen island with her notebook and 3 pages of handwritten notes and a coffee that had gone cold sometime while she was writing. She'd startled slightly when he appeared. "I didn't hear you come down." "You were concentrating." He gestured at the cold coffee. "How long has that been sitting there?" She looked at it. "I'm not sure." He poured it out and made her a fresh cup without asking, and she watched him do this with an expression he'd come to recognize. The one she wore when someone did something straightforward and kind, and she didn't quite know where to put it. Like her internal accounting system had a category for every kind of transaction except the uncomplicated ones. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." He handed her the mug. "How's the speech coming?" She looked at the pages. 3 sheets of dense handwriting, some lines crossed out, some marked with asterisks she'd added in the margins. "The argument is sound," she said. "The opening needs work." "What's wrong with it?" "It's too defensive." She tapped the top of the first page. "I started it by establishing Sterling House's credentials, which, it's not wrong, but it's the wrong instinct. I'm writing it like I'm still trying to convince someone I belong in the room." "Do you feel like you still need to convince them?" She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she said. "Yes." "But not always." She looked at him. "Less than I used to." He nodded. Sat down across the island with his own coffee. "So start with the argument itself, not the justification for making it. If the argument is good, the credentials follow naturally. People remember the idea, not the resume." She looked at the pages again. Something in her expression shifted. The slight inward focus of a person rearranging furniture in their head. "That's actually—" "Yes." She drew a line through the first paragraph. "Clean, decisive." "That's correct." He drank his coffee. She picked up her pen and started rewriting. The kitchen was quiet except for the scratch of the pen and the early morning sound of the city beginning to move outside the window. He thought later that this was one of the things he'd remember about those weeks in that house. Not the dramatic moments, which were coming, but the ordinary ones. The kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, the cold coffee poured out and replaced, a woman crossing out the defensive version of herself and starting again. The days moved toward the event. On the Friday before the Blackwood Summit, which was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening at the Columbia Tower, a venue downtown that was all glass and high ceilings, and the particular kind of architectural confidence that said money without needing to state it directly, Victoria came home from what she described as a necessary but unpleasant meeting with a financial partner, set her bag down on the kitchen chair with more force than usual, and stood at the counter for a moment with her back to him. "Bad one?" he said. "Long one." She turned around. She looked tired in a specific way. Not physically depleted, but the kind of tired that comes from performing composure for several consecutive hours. Her hair had come partly loose from where she'd pinned it. She hadn't fixed it, which was unusual. They spent 40 minutes asking questions about the new imprint that were really just different versions of one question. Which was? Whether I was actually going to be visible enough to represent it. She said it with a flatness that told him she'd kept a lid on it for the entire meeting and was now, in the privacy of the kitchen, allowing herself to register that it had been a lousy thing to sit through. They said that directly? They said, "Given your limited public profile in recent years, do you feel confident that the launch can be supported by your personal engagement with the industry?" Which is the polished version. She moved to the cabinet and got a glass. One of them, the younger one, Walsh, he's been doing this for about 4 years and has decided he's already seen everything, said that the imprint needed a face the industry can rally around. Then he looked at me. She poured water. He looked at me in that particular way, like he was making a point he didn't need to say out loud. Liam said nothing immediately. He sat with that for a moment, because it deserved to be sat with rather than covered over with something reassuring. "What did you say to him?" he asked. "I told him that the industry has been rallying around Sterling House's authors for 8 years based entirely on the quality of the work, and that the imprint would be supported by that same record." She drank the water. "And then I said that I'd be delivering the keynote at the Blackwood Summit in 5 days. So the question of visibility was resolved." "How'd that land?" Walsh looked surprised, which was satisfying. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite the almost smile, but its harder, sharper cousin. The others seemed reassured. "Good." "Yes." She set down the glass, stood for a moment, one hand on the counter. The tiredness was still there underneath the satisfaction of the meeting's resolution. "I'd like to not talk about work for the rest of this evening, if that's acceptable." "Completely acceptable." "Thank you." She went upstairs. He heard her moving around up there for a while. The creak of floorboards, a door, water running. He made dinner without thinking too much about it. Pasta again, because it was fast and he knew by now she'd eat it. And because the particular domesticity of cooking in someone else's kitchen on a Friday evening had stopped feeling strange approximately 2 weeks ago and had become simply a thing he did. When she came back downstairs, she'd changed out of the work clothes and was wearing dark jeans and a plain dark sweater, her hair down and slightly damp from the shower. She looked less composed than she usually did, which was, he found himself noting, not a bad look. She looked more like a person and less like a position. She stood in the kitchen doorway and assessed the stove. "You cooked. It's pasta. I don't know if that counts." "It counts." She moved to the island. "You didn't have to." "You said that last time." "It was true last time." "It's still true." "I did it anyway." He handed her a glass of water. "Set the table if you want something to do." She set the table. They ate. The conversation moved through things that had nothing to do with the event or the financial partners or Walsh and his pointed looks. She mentioned the debut novelist again, who had now sent revisions on the first 3 chapters, and her voice had that leaking quality of contained enthusiasm when she talked about it. He told her about a project at Nexus that was giving him trouble, a content strategy for a brand that didn't have a coherent identity and wanted him to build one from the outside in. She listened and asked the kind of questions that showed she understood the problem structurally, not just superficially, and said, "You can't build identity outward. You have to locate it first and then amplify. If the identity doesn't exist, you're just making noise that sounds like identity." Which was sharp and correct, and something his team had been trying to articulate for 2 weeks without getting there. You should be in content strategy, he said. I'm in acquisition, which is the same thing at different scale. That's actually, yes. She looked almost pleased with herself, briefly, in the private way she had. The Friday evening passed, the weekend passed, Monday and Tuesday passed with the particular compression of time that happens when something is approaching that you're not entirely sure you're ready for. Tuesday night, Liam was in his room reviewing materials for a Wednesday morning meeting when he heard her through the wall. Not voices, just movement. Footsteps. Back and forth in a pattern that was too regular to be anything other than pacing. He checked the time. 11:40. He closed his laptop and went downstairs and put the kettle on. She appeared at the kitchen doorway about 7 minutes later, wearing a look that suggested she'd heard the kettle and had a complicated internal debate about whether to come down. I couldn't sleep, she said, like she needed to account for it. I know. I made tea. He got out 2 mugs. Sit. She sat at the island. He made the tea and for the first time deliberately steeped it for exactly the right amount of time, not too long. Set the mug in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it. Drank. A pause. This is different. I steeped it correctly. She looked at the mug. It's less bitter. Yes. She drank more. Didn't say anything, which he took as acknowledgement. He sat across from her with his own mug and didn't ask her what she was thinking, because he could see what she was thinking. She was sitting with that braced stillness she'd had on the night she'd told him about the event. The night she'd stood holding the empty coffee carafe. The particular stillness of someone who is managing something that doesn't want to be managed. Tell me something, she said finally. What do you want to know? Anything. Not about tomorrow. She looked at the table. I've been inside my head for 3 hours, and I need something that isn't that. He thought for a moment. Nora's first word was bird. Victoria looked up. Not mama or dada or something standard. She was 14 months old, and she pointed at a pigeon outside the window and said bird, very clearly, and then looked at me like she expected credit for it. He turned the mug in his hands. Her mother and I had been... Things weren't great between us at that point. We were already heading somewhere we both knew we were heading. But we both heard Nora say bird, and we just looked at each other and laughed. Same laugh, same moment. It was the last time I remember that. Victoria was quiet. I think about that sometimes, Liam said. How a 14-month-old can look at something ordinary, a pigeon of all things, and say the word for it like it's the most significant discovery ever made. Like naming it is enough, like just being able to say what a thing is makes it worth something. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not the guarded assessment and not the almost smiles. Something more direct than either. She sounds singular, she said. She is. He said it without hesitation, the way parents say true things about their children. She's currently in a phase where she narrates everything she's doing, like she's a nature documentary. The Nora is eating her cereal. The Nora has found a very interesting bug. Carol says it's the funniest thing she's ever witnessed. You miss her. Every day? Simply, without drama. But she's okay. She's more than okay. She's with Carol, and she's got Gerald, and she's prosecuting houseplants, apparently. Victoria's expression shifted. Gerald? Her stuffed elephant, missing one eye. He's an authority on most matters. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, I don't have anything like that. A pause. Anyone like that? He didn't rush to fill the space. There were people before, she said. The accident changed the composition of things. Some people, she stopped, started differently. It turns out that accidents are very good at showing you the actual architecture of your relationships, which things were load-bearing and which were decoration. What was left? He asked. The work, she said. My editor, Ruth, who's been with me from the beginning and who does not permit me to feel sorry for myself, which I value highly. A few authors who sent letters during the period after the accident, who wrote to me not because they needed something from me, but because she paused. Because they saw me, not the situation. Me. A breath. Not many people, but enough. And now? She looked at him across the kitchen island in the late-night quiet of the house, and something in her expression did the thing it occasionally did, opened, fractionally, before she could stop it. And now there's been some addition to that number, she said. Recently. He held her gaze. Good, he said. They sat with their tea for a while after that, not talking. The house was very quiet around them. The particular silence of a house at midnight when the world outside has mostly stilled. Somewhere down the street, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. The tea cooled slowly. At some point, she said, I rewrote the opening of the speech. How's it start now? She looked at the table. Then, from memory, quietly, independent publishing exists because some stories cannot afford to wait for permission. This is one of them. A pause. And then I talk about the debut author, the 26-year-old. I talk about her book. He was quiet for a moment. That's better? Yes, she said. It is. She went to bed around 1. He sat at the island for a few more minutes, looking at nothing in particular. He thought about what she'd said, that accidents showed you the actual architecture of your relationships, which things were load-bearing and which were decoration. He'd had his own version of that inventory 3 years ago, when his marriage ended and the people he'd thought were in his corner turned out to be in his vicinity, which was different. He understood the aftermath of that kind of discovery, the way it made you careful. The way careful, maintained long enough, started to look like coldness from the outside, even when the inside of it was something more complicated. Not coldness, but the particular caution of someone who has learned that not everything that looks like a foundation is one. He turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. The next evening, they drove to the Columbia Tower together. Victoria had been quiet most of the day. Not the withdrawn, remote quiet of her early weeks in the house, but a contained, inward quiet, the quality of someone who is gathering themselves for something, holding their energy close. She'd spent the afternoon upstairs, and when she came down at 5:30, she was dressed in a way he hadn't seen before. A dark midnight blue dress, structured and precise without being severe, her hair down and carefully done. A detail he noticed because her hair was almost always pinned back or twisted up when she was working. She'd done something different with it. It was the same hair, the same color, but it fell in a way that was not softer exactly, but considered, like she'd made decisions about it. She'd also, he noticed, arranged it so that it fell forward slightly on the left side. He noticed this and said nothing about it because she'd made a choice and the choice was hers to make. You look, he paused, thinking about the right word. She looked at him with a readiness to receive something double-edged. Formidable, he said. Something in her expression released. That's the appropriate objective, she said. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the city moving past the window. Portland on a November evening, the streets wet from earlier rain, the lights reflecting in elongated shapes on the asphalt. He didn't fill the silence with noise. She seemed to appreciate that. The Columbia Tower's event level was already full when they arrived. 300 people distributed across a large room with views of the city, catering stations positioned along the perimeter, clusters of industry figures and the particular conversational arrangements of people who are networking and performing comfort simultaneously. It smelled like catering and expensive perfume and the faintly anxious energy of a room where people were quietly trying to figure out who else was in it. Liam was aware of the moment Victoria registered the room's scale. He felt it in the slight change beside him. Nothing visible, just a quality of stillness that arrived and then was controlled. He stood close enough that she could feel his presence without it being theatrical. I need a minute, she said quietly. Take it. She stood just inside the entrance, not moving into the room. He stood beside her. A waiter passed with champagne. He took 2 glasses and handed her one, not because she needed it necessarily, but because having something to hold was useful in rooms like this. She took it. Okay, she said after a moment. Okay. They moved into the room. The first 20 minutes were the hardest, and he could see her working through them. She navigated the room with the precise efficiency of someone who has planned a route in advance. She knew which conversations she needed to have, and she moved toward them systematically, And when people looked at her, she met their eyes without shifting, without angling her face away the way she usually did. He stayed close, but not attached, present, but not covering for her. She didn't need covering for. She needed, he realized, watching her, a fixed point. Somewhere her gaze could land when the room got too loud, too full, too many faces at once. He was the fixed point. He understood this, and he was fine with it. She was mid-conversation with a senior editor from a Boston house, a conversation that had started as professional courtesy and was becoming genuinely engaged on both sides, both of them leaning slightly in, the editor making a note on his phone of something she'd said, when Liam felt a change in the immediate vicinity, a shift in attention from somewhere nearby, directed at them and not with the neutral curiosity of a room full of strangers. He turned. The man who was watching them was around 35, well-dressed in the particular way of someone who cares about appearance as a statement rather than a comfort, with the kind of easy physical confidence that can come from genuine ease or from never having had sufficient reason to doubt yourself. Liam registered him without having a name for him yet, but something about the quality of attention, the specific way he was looking at Victoria with that studied casualness that is always the least casual thing in any room, registered as significant. The Boston editor excused himself to find someone he'd spotted across the room. Victoria turned, glass in hand, and saw the man. Everything in her changed, not dramatically. She didn't flinch or step back or do any of the things that announce themselves. But Liam was close enough and had spent enough weeks paying attention to the specific language of her body to see it. The infinitesimal stiffening, the way her chin came up very slightly, the deliberate steadying that happened in the space of half a second. The man approached. Victoria. His voice was the voice of someone who has decided he gets to use her name without permission, which told Liam most of what he needed to know immediately. I didn't know you'd be here. Hello, Carter, she said. The flatness of it was extraordinary. 2 words, completely drained of everything except the bare function of acknowledgement. It's been... He made a gesture that was supposed to communicate the passage of time but felt practiced. God, a long time. Yes. Carter's eyes moved to Liam, assessing him with the quick efficiency of someone who categorizes people rapidly and confidently. Friend of yours? Colleague, Victoria said. Liam extended his hand before she could say more. Liam Bennett. Nexus Media. Carter shook it, with the grip of a man who has opinions about handshakes. Carter Voss. Voss Partners. He said it like the name should land somewhere. When it didn't visibly land on Liam, something shifted fractionally in Carter's expression. He turned back to Victoria, and Liam watched the quality of the man's attention sharpen in a way that was not kind. You look... He paused, and that pause did work. Brave, he said. The word fell in a very specific way. Not a compliment. Something shaped like a compliment with a different center. Victoria didn't react to it. Her expression remained precisely what it had been. I look exactly as I look, Carter, as I always have. Of course. A smile that didn't include his eyes. And you're giving the keynote? I saw the program. Yes. That's good, Victoria. It's really good. Something in his tone had the particular condescension of someone performing surprise that you've managed to get dressed in the morning. I wasn't sure, given... He stopped, as if catching himself. As if that stopping were meant to register as consideration. Given what? Her voice was even. It was a trap, and she knew it, and she said it anyway, cleanly. Carter's smile stayed fixed. Given that you've been... quiet. For a while. He let the word quiet sit there, waited. We've all wondered how you were managing things. The company, I mean, from a distance. He was doing it with such apparent smoothness that someone not paying close attention might have missed the specific anatomy of it. The concern that wasn't concern. The praise that wasn't praise. The performance of care as a delivery mechanism for diminishment. Liam had met men who operated this way before. There was a particular kind of man who learned early that cruelty, wrapped in the right language, was almost impossible to call out in a crowd without you being the one who seemed unreasonable. Victoria knew this too. He could see that she knew it in her bones. The way you know something that has been done to you repeatedly and precisely. Sterling House has had 8 consecutive years of revenue growth, she said. Our literary fiction list has produced 3 national award winners in 4 years. The imprint we're launching in January has already secured pre-sales projections that exceed our strongest previous launch. Things are being managed adequately. A pause, exactly calibrated. From a distance or otherwise. Carter nodded, smiled. Impressive. And this was when Liam felt the temperature in the small space between the 3 of them shift. Carter's gaze moved to the scar. Not subtly. Not with the accidental quality of a gaze that lands somewhere uninvited. With the specific deliberateness of a man who knows exactly where he's looking and why. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then he looked back at her face. You always were resilient, Carter said. That was always the thing about you. And there it was. In the word always, in the past tense of it. In the framing of resilience as a characteristic rather than a choice. Something inherent rather than something earned. The particular flattery that puts a ceiling on someone while pretending to acknowledge their floor. Victoria's jaw tightened. Just once. Just enough. Excuse me, she said. I have a conversation I need to get to. She turned. Liam fell into step beside her, and as they moved away from Carter Voss and back into the broader room, he noticed that her breathing had changed. Controlled, deliberate, the kind of breath you take when you are actively managing something that wants to come out differently. They found a quieter spot near the window wall, the city spread out below them in November, dark and light. She stood with her back to most of the room, looking out, and for a moment she was very still. I'm fine, she said, before he could say anything. I didn't say you weren't. The look on your face said it. The look on my face is concern, which is different from doubting you. She looked out the window. A muscle in her jaw worked once and then was still. He was always good at that, she said quietly, at making something ugly sound like something thoughtful. When we were together, I used to exhaust myself trying to figure out which version of what he said was the real one. A breath. The accident removed that confusion. It turned out there was only one version. Liam said nothing. He stood beside her and let the city exist below them. He looked at it, she said, deliberately. I saw. He's done that before, in other contexts. It's something he does to establish, she stopped, to remind me that he's looked and that he's made his assessment and that the assessment is known between us. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. I have not been in the same room as him in 4 years. I thought possibly, she stopped again. That it would be different, Liam said. That I would be different, she said, which apparently I am not. You are, he said. You're standing here. You're still in the room. She looked at the window, at her own reflection in it, partial and dark, the city behind it. There's a part of me, she said, that wants to leave, that has been wanting to leave since we walked in, and that wants to leave more now. I know. I have a keynote in 40 minutes. I know. I built something real. Her voice was quiet and very controlled. I built something that exists and functions and matters and produces work that is genuinely worth something. And he stood there and... She stopped. And he stood there and talked to you like you were still the person he decided you were when he left, Liam said. Which you're not. You haven't been for a long time. She turned and looked at him. He looked at your face like it was the whole of you, Liam said. But it isn't. You know that. You know it more than I do. Her eyes were very direct. Something was working behind them. Not tears, or not that alone. Something more complicated. The particular internal motion of a person who has been told something they needed to hear and is simultaneously resisting it and receiving it. I don't need you to defend me, she said. I'm not defending you. I'm agreeing with what you already know. A pause. He called you resilient, Liam said, like it was a trait you were born with that makes difficulty easier to bear. That's not what it is. You built a company from zero. You published books that wouldn't exist without you. You kept going when it would have been completely reasonable to stop. A beat. That's not resilience. That's a choice, made repeatedly, under conditions that didn't make it easy. That's different. She looked at him for a long time. You're going to give the speech, he said, not because of Carter Voss and not despite him, because you have something worth saying, and there are 300 people in that room who are in the industry you care about, and some of them need to hear it. And if I fall apart up there, then you fall apart up there, he said, and then you keep talking. Something in her expression broke open, very slightly. Not collapse, just the hairline crack that forms when a pressure that has been building finds the smallest possible release. Independent publishing exists because some stories cannot afford to wait for permission, she said quietly. The opening of the speech. From memory. Yes, he said. She looked at the city, then she looked at him, then she turned and looked at the room behind them, the crowd, the catering stations, the clusters of conversations, and somewhere in it Carter Voss with his practiced smile and his deliberately placed gaze. All right, she said. She straightened, set her shoulders in that precise, deliberate way she had, took a breath. I'm going to talk to the Meridian Group before the keynote, she said. They've been looking for an independent press to partner with for their international rights division. I've been putting this conversation off for 7 months. Go have it, he said. She moved back into the room. He watched her cross toward a group near the center, a cluster of people who looked up as she approached, and he saw the moment they registered who she was. The slight realignment of attention that accompanies recognition. She extended her hand to the nearest one, and her posture was exactly right. And when she smiled, it was real, or real enough that it functioned, and she began to talk. He got himself a glass of water from a passing waiter and stood near the window for a while, not looking at her, because she didn't need to be watched over, and he didn't want to be that. He looked at the city instead. Portland on a November night, the bridges lit over the dark river far below. Carter Voss materialized at his elbow about 15 minutes later, which Liam had half expected. Nexus Media, Carter said. Conversationally, the way people try to appear casual. Content and strategy? That's right. Good company. Strong Portland expansion. Carter stood beside him, looking out at the city. Victoria mentioned you're staying at the house. Temporarily, while I find permanent housing. Right. A pause that was supposed to feel easy and didn't. She mentioned me? Liam looked at him. No, he said, simply, factually. Carter nodded, like this was fine, like he'd expected that, and the nodding didn't cover what it was supposed to cover. She's done well, Carter said. Considering what? Another pause. The adjustment, Carter said. After the accident. It's been an adjustment for everyone around her. Liam held the man's gaze. I imagine it's been more of an adjustment for her than for anyone around her. Carter smiled, the smile that didn't reach. Sure. Of course. She's giving the keynote in 20 minutes, Liam said. I think she's probably one of about 3 people in this room qualified to say what she's going to say about independent publishing. You should probably stay for it. He moved away from Carter Voss and went to refill his water. When the keynote was announced, 40 minutes later, and Victoria walked to the podium at the front of the room, Liam was standing toward the back. He watched her settle at the podium and look out at the room, and for one moment, before she started speaking, she found him where he stood, and something passed between them that had no name and didn't need one. Then she looked at the room. Independent publishing exists, she said, because some stories cannot afford to wait for permission. Her voice was clear and steady and carried across the entire room. He crossed his arms, leaned back slightly against the wall, and listened to Victoria Sterling say the true things she'd been keeping inside herself for years, offered now to a room that needed to hear them, on a night she almost didn't come. She spoke for 32 minutes. Liam knew this because he checked his watch when she started and again when she finished, not out of impatience, but because he wanted to hold the specific weight of it. 32 minutes in which Victoria Sterling stood at a podium in front of 300 people and said exactly what she thought, without hedging, without the defensive preamble she'd crossed out at the kitchen island at 6 in the morning, without angling her face away from the light. The speech was not perfect. There was a moment around the 10-minute mark where she lost her place briefly. He could see it, the fractional pause, the slight drop of her eyes to her notes. And she recovered by slowing down rather than speeding up, which was the right instinct and probably felt, from her side of the podium, like an eternity. There was another moment near the end where her voice changed register slightly, got quieter, when she talked about the debut novelist, the 26-year-old with the fragmented structure and the devastating emotional continuity, and quoted a line from the manuscript without attributing it, because the book wasn't published yet, just said, "One of our authors wrote something recently that I haven't been able to stop thinking about," and then said the line. And the line was good enough that the room felt it. But the imperfections were not the point. The point was the room and what was happening in it. He'd been to enough presentations and panels and industry events in his years at Nexus to know the difference between an audience that is politely present and an audience that is actually listening. Polite presence has a certain diffuse quality. People with their phones at half attention, the ambient sound of a room doing other things while someone speaks at the front of it. Actual listening is different. It has a texture, a specific quality of collective stillness, the sound of 300 people deciding simultaneously that what is happening at the front of the room is more interesting than anything on their phones. The room was listening. He watched it happen. Watched people who had been in mid-conversation turn toward the podium, watched the particular kind of attention that a room gives when something real is being said to it, rather than performed at it. Victoria was not performing. That was the thing. She was talking about independent publishing the way someone talks about something they have spent years caring about in private, and the privacy of it, the sense that the audience was being led into something rather than being sold something, was what made the room go still. She talked about the specific responsibility of small presses to books that larger publishers couldn't afford to take risks on. She talked about the difference between publishing for the market and publishing for the culture, and why those two things were not always the same, and what happened when they were confused for each other. She talked about the debut novelist without naming her, talked about the cover letter that almost sank the submission and what would have been lost if they'd stopped at the cover letter. And she said something that landed in the room with the particular weight of a true thing spoken plainly. We almost missed her because she didn't know how to sell herself. That's not a gap in her, it's a gap in our systems. And the question I ask myself constantly is how many voices we've lost because our intake systems reward pitch over substance. Someone near the front actually wrote that down. Liam saw them do it. She closed the speech by returning to the opening. Independent publishing exists because some stories cannot afford to wait for permission. And she extended it, said that the new imprint Sterling House was launching in January was an explicit attempt to reduce that waiting period for a specific category of voices, and that she would be announcing the imprint's full details and first slate at an event in January, and she looked forward to those conversations. Then she said thank you and stepped back from the podium. The applause was immediate, and it was not the polite kind. It had the quality of genuine response, not unanimous enthusiasm, because rooms of 300 people are never unanimous about anything, but something real, something that came from people who'd been given something and were registering having received it. Liam clapped with everyone else, standing near the back wall, and felt something that was specifically not pride. Pride would have been presumptuous, would have implied a claim on her achievement that he didn't have. What he felt was closer to relief, or gratitude maybe. The particular gratitude of witnessing something that could easily not have happened. He found her 20 minutes later, near the window where they'd stood before the speech. She was in conversation with a woman he didn't recognize, 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of focused attention that suggested someone used to being the most important person in most rooms she entered. Victoria was talking. The silver-haired woman was listening and nodding with the specific nod of someone running calculations. He got a glass of water and waited. When the conversation concluded, with the exchange of cards and the particular warmth of two people who have just discovered their interests align in useful ways, Victoria turned and found him, and he saw immediately that she was running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline and wasn't quite relief, some complicated mixture of both. Plus, something else he couldn't name that sat behind her eyes and made her look more present than he'd ever seen her. That was Eleanor Marsh, she said when she reached him. Marsh Global Media. He knew the name. The International Distribution Partnership. She came to me. Victoria said it with a deliberateness that suggested she understood the significance of the direction of the approach. She said she'd been trying to find the right moment to initiate a conversation for 6 months and hadn't been able to get past my office. She said the speech gave her the opening. She approached you. Yes. A breath. She wants a meeting next week. Formal proposal, full partnership structure for international rights on the new imprint, and potentially the backlist. Victoria, I know what it is. She looked at him. Her expression was doing something complicated. Not quite overwhelmed, not quite composed, somewhere in the middle of a thing she hadn't finished processing. There were 2 other people after the speech, a buyer from the Pacific Northwest independent booksellers who wants to do a co-promotion campaign for the January launch, and someone from the Portland Business Journal who wants to profile the imprint. A pause. Profile Sterling House, with me in it. A photo piece? Yes. He waited because the significance of that last one was different from the others, and she knew it. I said yes to all 3, she said. Good. I almost said no to the journal piece. She looked at the window. There was a moment where I had the no already formed, and then I thought about what you said, about falling apart and then continuing. You didn't fall apart. No, but She stopped, started again. There was a moment at the podium. About 10 minutes in, I lost my place, and for about 3 seconds I could feel the entire room and everyone in it, and I knew exactly where my face was in relation to the lights, and I thought. She stopped. What did you think? I thought he would have enjoyed this, watching me struggle up there. She said it flatly, factually. And then I thought, I don't care what he would have enjoyed. That's not information I need. A breath. And then I found my place and kept going. Liam said nothing for a moment. Then, for what it's worth, I was watching. You lost your place for about 2 seconds and recovered so cleanly that most people in that room never noticed. She looked at him. You were watching the whole time. Yes. She looked at him for a moment longer than she usually held eye contact. Something moved through her expression that she didn't entirely manage. Not the almost smile, not the assessor's look, not the braced composure. Something rawer than any of those. Thank you, she said, for being. She stopped, seemed to decide something, and continued more quietly. For being a fixed point. He understood what she meant by that. He hadn't said it out loud, and she'd felt it anyway, which told him something about how closely she'd been paying attention to him in return. Anytime, he said. They stayed at the event another hour. She moved through it differently in that second hour. Not the controlled route-mapped movement of the first hour, but something looser, more responsive, stopping when a conversation interested her, rather than because it was strategically necessary. He watched her laugh at something a small press editor from Vancouver said, a genuine laugh, short and surprised, and then lean into the conversation with the focused enthusiasm she usually reserved for manuscripts that had captured her. Carter Voss left before the keynote ended. Liam noticed his absence in the room before Victoria did, and when she finally looked up and registered it, her expression did something brief and complicated, and then settled. She didn't ask about him. Liam didn't volunteer anything. Some things are concluded more cleanly by simply not being continued. They drove home at 11. The city was quieter, the wet streets catching the light differently at this hour, Portland doing the thing it did in November, where the rain turned everything reflective and strange and not entirely real. Victoria sat in the passenger seat as she had on the way there, but the quality of the quiet was entirely different. Not the braced stillness of someone managing what was coming, but the particular quiet of someone who has done a hard thing and is now on the other side of it, rearranging their understanding of what they're capable of. The profile piece, she said at one point, somewhere on the West Hills Road climbing back toward the house. Yeah? They'll want photographs, which means. She didn't finish it. Which means what you look like will be in the piece. Yes. A pause. They'll run it however they run it, she said. I can't control that. I've been trying to control that by staying invisible, and what it's produced is 5 years of absence. She looked at the road ahead. I think I'm done optimizing for invisibility. That's a significant sentence. Yes, she said. I know. He pulled into the lane that led to the house, The familiar gates, the familiar dark stone behind the Douglas firs. He parked and they sat in the car for a moment after the engine cut, which was something they hadn't done before. That slight extension of the evening, the mutual unspokenness of not quite being ready to go inside and let the night end. "I need to call Ruth tomorrow," Victoria said finally. "My editor. She's going to want to debrief about the partnerships, and probably give me a hard time about waiting this long to get back out there because that's what she does." "She sounds like exactly what you need. She's infuriating and she's been right about everything for 8 years, so yes." She reached for the door handle and then didn't open it yet. "Liam." "Yeah." "When you leave," she paused. "When you find your permanent housing, you and Nora." Another pause, careful with itself. "I want you to know that this arrangement has been—" She stopped, seemed to find the word unsatisfying and discard it. Tried again. "I'm not the same as I was in October. Some of that is the event tonight. Some of it is incremental. And I know that incremental part doesn't belong to you, that I did it myself, but—" She looked at the windshield. "I want you to know that you being here, the specific way you've been here, has mattered." Liam sat with that for a moment, holding it with the care it deserved. "Victoria," he said, "you gave that speech tonight. You talked to Eleanor Marsh and the bookseller and the journalist, and you did all of it without asking anyone's permission. I was just in the room." "You were a fixed point," she said again quietly. "You fixed yourself," he said. "I just—" He thought about the right words. "I just didn't move." She looked at him then, in the dark of the car, the house lights faint beyond the windshield. The scar was visible in the low light. He'd long since stopped registering it as a separate fact from her face, the way you stop hearing the hum of an appliance you've lived with long enough. It was simply her face. It was simply Victoria. She held his gaze for a moment in the way she rarely did, steadily, without the habit of deflection. Then she opened the car door and got out, and he did the same, and they went inside. The kitchen, when they got there, had the particular warmth of a place you've returned to enough times that it registers as yours. He put the kettle on. She sat at the island and took off her shoes. An oddly small gesture, domestic and unguarded, the heels set side by side on the floor beside the stool. She had the look of someone who has used a great deal of themselves over the course of an evening and is now quietly inventorying what's left. He made tea, correctly steeped, same as the night before. Set the mug in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it, drank. "Still different," she said. "Still correct," he said. She almost smiled. He counted it. They sat with their tea for a while, and the evening decomposed gradually into the ordinary. She mentioned the Marcus Hale situation, which had apparently resolved itself during the week, the author having called Ruth directly to say he'd decided to set aside the current draft and start the better book. She talked about it with the satisfaction of someone for whom the right outcome landing is its own reward, regardless of the difficulty of the path. He told her about a small but legitimately funny disaster that had occurred at Nexus that morning, a content calendar that had been submitted to a client with placeholder text still in it, which had been discovered by the client and which had involved a very specific 40-minute conversation that Liam had handled with what he felt was remarkable composure given the circumstances. She laughed. Not the short, surprised laugh from the party, a fuller one, less controlled, the kind that happens when something genuinely gets through your defenses. It changed her face. He'd seen glimpses of it before, in small moments, but this was the most unguarded version of it, and it lasted long enough to be real, and then she caught herself and the composure came back, but the warmth underneath it didn't leave. "That's a very bad day," she said. "It really was." "What did you tell the client?" "The truth, which was that we'd submitted an incomplete draft in error, that it wouldn't happen again, and that I was personally reviewing all client-facing materials going forward." "Not who made the error." "My responsibility to manage, not theirs to know." She looked at him. "That's—" She seemed to weigh something. "That's the right call. Not everyone makes it. I've made the other one before. It doesn't make anything better." She drank her tea. "How long have you been managing people?" "In a formal sense, 3 years. In a practical sense, my whole life. I'm the oldest of 4. Siblings. Two brothers, one sister, spread across Seattle, Sacramento, and Chicago. We're close in the way of people who grew up in a small house with insufficient resources and developed loyalty as a survival strategy. That's a precise description. I've had a lot of time to think about it. She was quiet for a moment. I'm an only child, she said. I used to wish I wasn't. Now I think it made me concentrated, which isn't always a good thing. Concentrated how? My attention, my investments. When I care about something, I care about it completely. The company, the authors, it doesn't, she paused. It doesn't distribute well. I don't have many things I care about, but the ones I have get most of me. He understood what she was saying, and he understood also the things she was saying adjacent to it, the things she hadn't quite said directly. That sounds like a good way to love something, he said. She looked at him. The word love, placed there plainly without ceremony, sat between them in the kitchen light. It's also, she said carefully, how I've gotten hurt. I know. Caring about something completely means that there's more to lose, he said. Yeah. She looked at the mug. Something was moving behind her eyes, a careful interior negotiation. You're going to find a place, she said, and move. And Nora's going to come, and your actual life is going to start, and Victoria. She looked up. My actual life has been going on this whole time, he said, including this part of it. She was quiet. I'm not going to disappear, he said. I don't know what this is, but I know it isn't nothing, and I know that me finding an apartment somewhere in Portland doesn't conclude it. She looked at him with the look he'd first seen in the car, the one that held his gaze without deflection, steady and direct and more present than almost anything he'd seen from her. I don't know how to do this slowly, she said. I tend to, either I'm fully in something or I'm not in it at all. I don't have good wiring for the middle. Neither do I, if I'm being honest. You seem, she paused, you seem measured. You seem like someone who takes their time. I take my time when I need to think something through, he said. That's different from taking my time because I'm uncertain. He looked at her. I'm not uncertain. She absorbed this. Sat with it in the particular way she sat with things, not rushing to a response. I don't know what I'm doing, she said finally, with any of this. The imprint, the partnerships, the photograph in the article that I just agreed to, whatever this. She gestured vaguely at the space between them, which was a more Victoria Sterling way of naming a thing than he'd heard from her before. I'm doing things I haven't done in years, and I don't have. She stopped. I keep waiting for the thing I forgot, the thing that makes this the wrong call. Maybe there isn't one. There usually is. Usually isn't the same as always. She looked at him. You're very irritatingly consistent, she said. I've been told. By who? Deborah Park, my boss. She also said I was difficult to rattle, which she meant as a compliment, I think, but it contained a note of frustration. I understand that frustration, Victoria said, with the kind of precision that was also something warmer than precision. He leaned his forearms on the island. They were close, the island between them, the kind of distance that isn't large in a kitchen, and felt, at this hour, even smaller. She didn't move back. Can I ask you something? He said. You always do regardless. The 3-page letter, the 26-year-old author's letter that you kept on your desk for 4 months. He looked at her. What was the line? The one that made you keep it? She looked at the mug. Then, she wrote, she said, you saw the book for what it was reaching toward, not for what it fell short of. I didn't know that was possible until you showed me it was. A pause. She was talking about the editorial letter I sent, but I kept it because, I don't know. She turned the mug in her hands. I suppose because I've spent a long time being evaluated for where I fall short, and I knew what it had meant to her to have someone look at it differently. Another pause, quieter. I knew because I would have wanted someone to do it for me. The kitchen was very quiet. The city outside had gone fully into its late-night mode, and there was almost no sound from beyond the windows. Liam looked at her. You're not what you fall short of, he said. For what it's worth, from where I'm sitting. She looked up. You're what you reach toward, he said, and what you reach toward is considerable. She was still for a long moment, the kind of still that isn't absence but its opposite, the stillness of someone who is very fully present and doesn't know quite where to put that. Then she stood up from the stool. She moved around the island, not quickly, not with any drama, just moved. And she stopped in front of him, and she looked at him from a distance that was close. I'm bad at this, she said. At whatever this is. The part that comes before the part you know for certain. I make it complicated. I know, he said. It doesn't put you off. No. Why not? He thought about that honestly. Because complicated usually means real, he said. And I'd rather have the real version. She looked at him for a moment that stretched long enough to have texture, to have weight, to be something you could hold in your hands. Then she kissed him. Brief, tentative, the kind of first kiss that is mostly question, that asks something without being certain of the answer, that extends itself far enough to make the intention clear and no further, because the further is new territory, and new territory requires permission. He kissed her back. Gently, in a way that answered the question. She pulled back, looked at him. Her expression was a thing he had no category for, open, a little undone, slightly alarmed by its own openness, which was the most Victoria Sterling combination of things he could have predicted. That was... She stopped. Yeah, he said. I don't... She stopped again, put a hand on the island, steadying herself against something that was probably internal rather than physical. I don't know what happens now. We finish our tea, he said, and then we go to sleep. And then we figure the rest out. She looked at him. Something in her expression relaxed, fractionally, the specific release of someone who has been waiting for a complication that didn't materialize. That's simple, she said. Not simple, he said. Just one thing at a time. She turned back to the island and picked up her mug and drank her tea. He did the same. The kitchen held them both in its warm light, the hour late and the city quiet, and the Douglas firs barely moving outside the window. He thought about Nora's drawing, the house with the trees and the two stick figures. Datey's new hows. He thought about how a 5-year-old had known something in her imprecise and instinctive way that had taken him longer to locate. He didn't say this out loud. Some things are worth holding for a while before you put them into words. He'd learned that from watching a woman who chose her words with extreme care, who said less than she felt and felt more than most people, who had spent 5 years deciding that exposure was the greater risk and was now, slowly and with visible effort, reconsidering. Victoria set down her mug. Good night, she said. But she said it differently than she usually said it, with a quality underneath it, a warmth that didn't try to conceal itself, which was new. Good night, Victoria. She went upstairs. He stood at the island for a while, in the kitchen that had become familiar, in the house that had become something more than temporary shelter, and he didn't think about the logistics of what came next or the various ways things could be complicated. He just stood there in the quiet and let the night be what it was. On Thursday morning, he called Carol. So, she said, because Carol had a supernatural ability to detect subtext from a single syllable. How are things in Portland? They're good, he said. Things are good. A pause on the other end. That's a specific kind of good, Carol said. That's a, there is something I'm not telling you kind of good. I'm going to start looking at apartments this weekend. Carol clearly was not fooled by the subject change. And how is the woman whose house you're living in? He was quiet for a moment. Liam. She gave a speech last night, he said, to 300 people. She's building something. She's remarkable. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, Carol said, not with judgment. With the particular gentleness of someone who has known him long enough to understand the weight of the word remarkable coming from him in that tone. How's Nora? He said. Nora is fine. She has declared Gerald to be a witness for the defense in the ongoing ficus trial. She also learned to make her own toast this morning, which she is very proud of. A beat. She asked when she gets to see the house with the trees. He looked out the kitchen window at the Douglas firs, moving slightly in the November morning. "Soon," he said. "Tell her soon." He meant it. He'd meant things less certain than this, and they'd turned out fine, and he'd meant things more certain than this, and they'd collapsed. But this, the house with the trees, the woman who was reconsidering the size of the life she was willing to live, the work he was doing, and the daughter who was coming, this felt, in a way he didn't have a better word for, like the correct direction. Not smooth, not guaranteed, not anything except the thing it was, which was real. The kettle started its noise on the stove. Somewhere upstairs, a door opened. He heard footsteps, the specific creak of the hallway outside Victoria's office that he'd learned to recognize, and then the particular rhythm of her coming down the stairs, the same way she came down every morning, to the kitchen, to the window, to the first cup of coffee of the day. He got 2 mugs down from the cabinet. He waited. The apartment he found was on the 4th floor of a building on Northwest Thurman, 12 minutes from the Sterling house by car, with 2 bedrooms and a window in the second one that faced east, and caught the morning light in a way that he immediately thought Nora would like. The building was older, with the kind of minor imperfections that older buildings have, a slightly uneven floor in the hallway, a radiator that made a sound like a small argument when it cycled on. But it was clean and solid, and the landlord was a woman in her 60s named Pat, who showed him the unit without salesmanship, which he appreciated. He signed the lease on a Saturday morning in early December, 3 days before Nora was scheduled to arrive on the train from Tacoma with Carol. He told Victoria that evening. She was at the island with a manuscript, reading glasses on. She'd stopped leaving them on top of the refrigerator sometime in the 3rd week of November. They now lived on the island beside her notebook, which he suspected was connected to the fact that she'd stopped needing to perform absent-mindedness and had simply started putting things where she'd actually look for them. Small shifts, the kind that don't announce themselves. "Northwest Thurman," she said when he told her. "You know it?" "I know Portland." She turned a page. "That's a good neighborhood. Quiet, close to the park." "The building on Thurman with the green awning?" "That's the one." She nodded. Didn't say anything else immediately. He watched her read for a moment, or perform reading. He could tell the difference by now, and the difference was in her eyes, and her eyes were not moving. "You're not actually reading," he said. She looked up. "I'm processing." "What are you processing?" She set the manuscript down and took her glasses off, which was the gesture she made when she was about to say something she'd been thinking about for longer than the current conversation. "The arrangement here ends," she said, which we both knew it would. "It ends," he said. "The arrangement does." She looked at him. She'd gotten better at holding eye contact over the past month. Not consistently, and not without effort, but better. I want to be careful," she said, "about how this goes. I'm not good at—" She paused. "I have a history of attaching to things completely and then not having a contingency for what happens when they change." "I'm not a thing," he said. "No, that came out wrong." She folded her glasses, unfolded them. "I mean that I don't do well with the middle ground, with whatever the phase is between what we've been and whatever comes after. I tend to skip that phase by either holding on too hard or letting go entirely." "What do you want to do this time?" She looked at the glasses in her hand. "Neither," she said quietly. "I want to try the part I usually skip." He sat down across from her. "Then that's what we do." "It won't be—" She stopped, tried again. "I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. I know that about myself. I'll pull back when I should stay, and I'll probably say something at exactly the wrong moment that makes everything harder." "Yeah," he said. "And I'll probably give you space when what you actually need is for someone to stay put. And I'll overcorrect when I think something is going wrong, and I'll be wrong about what's going wrong." He shrugged. "We'll figure it out." She looked at him with the expression that was no longer the almost smile, that had become, over weeks of incremental change, an actual thing, smaller than a full smile, reserved and real, belonging only to the moments when something had gotten through all her defenses without her quite being ready for it. "You make it sound manageable," she said. "It is manageable," he said. "It's just not easy. Those are different things." She put her glasses back on, picked up the manuscript. But she was smiling, the real one, small and private, as she did it, and she didn't try to put it away. Nora arrived on a Tuesday, on the afternoon train, wearing a purple coat and carrying Gerald tucked under one arm with the authority of someone transporting a dignitary. She had grown, or seemed to have grown. Children do this thing where if you haven't seen them for 6 weeks, they look like an entirely different calibration of themselves, taller, or more certain, or somehow more formed. She came through the station exit and saw Liam and said, "Daddy," in a tone that suggested mild reproach for the distance between them. And then she ran at him with the full-body commitment of a 5-year-old who has decided that the running is the point. And he caught her, and she wrapped around him, and he stood there in the train station with his daughter attached to him like a barnacle, and thought, not for the first time, that everything else in his life was context, and this was the actual content. Carol watched from a few feet back with the expression of a woman who has earned the right to be sentimental about things without apologizing for it. "She talked about you every day," Carol said when he surfaced. "Without fail. Is Daddy building the house? Is Daddy done? Does Daddy have Gerald's room ready?" "Gerald has a windowsill," Liam said. He looked at Nora, who was still attached to his shoulder. "The east-facing one. Best light in the apartment." Nora considered this with appropriate gravity. "Gerald approves," she said. "He told me on the train." "Long conversation?" "Very." She pulled back to look at him, holding his face in both hands with the alarming directness of small children who have not yet learned that looking at someone's face is a vulnerable thing. "You look different," she said. "Good different or bad different?" She studied him. "Happy different," she said, with the certainty of someone who has made a diagnosis. He looked at his daughter. "Yeah, Bug," he said. "That's probably right." Carol left that evening after helping them settle into the apartment, hugging Nora for a long time, and then hugging Liam and saying quietly against his ear, "You're going to be okay. All of you." Which was Carol's way of saying she knew about Victoria without being told, and was choosing to approve without making it into a conversation. He held on to her for an extra second before letting go. The apartment took shape over the following week in the way apartments do when a child is involved. Not organized, but inhabited, Nora's particular energy-filling corners and surfaces with drawings and small collected objects and the various projects of her imagination. She set up a court in the second bedroom that served as both her room and a judicial chamber, with Gerald as chief witness, and she informed Liam on the third day that the apartment plant, a small fern he'd bought on impulse from the farmer's market, was called Henry and was on probation pending a hearing about an undisclosed incident. He called Victoria on Friday night. They'd talked twice since he'd moved out, once briefly about a book she'd mentioned and wanted his opinion on, once longer and less structured, meandering through a Thursday evening in the way conversations go when two people are getting used to the shape of each other at a distance. Both calls had had a slightly provisional quality, like two people learning a new route and not quite trusting their footing yet. This one was different. He'd gotten Nora to bed, a 40-minute process involving 2 stories, one negotiation about how many times Gerald could be introduced to the fern, and a firm discussion about whether 5-year-olds needed water at 9 p.m. or were simply stalling. And then he'd sat on the couch in the quiet apartment and called Victoria because he wanted to talk to her without any other reason beyond that. She answered on the second ring. "Hi." "Hi." He settled back against the couch cushion. "How was the Marsh meeting?" "Good. More than good." He could hear the contained satisfaction in her voice that he'd come to recognize as her version of enthusiasm. "They've proposed a partnership structure that covers international rights for the new imprint plus selective backlist titles. The numbers are..." A pause. "Significant." "Did you shake on it?" "We agreed in principle. The formal contract drafts come next week." A pause. "Eleanor Marsh she's smart in a way I wasn't entirely prepared for, which I find I enjoy. You like being surprised by people's intelligence. I like when people meet the standard I'd set for them without knowing they were being set one." She paused. "Which is probably an unfair way to operate." "Probably," he said. "But I think most people who care about quality operate some version of it." She was quiet for a moment. He heard the faint ambient sound of her house. He knew its sounds still, the refrigerator hum, and the particular quality of the silence in the upper rooms. "How's Nora settling in?" she said. "She's put a Fern on probation and established a judicial system," he said. "So I'd say fully." A sound from Victoria that was close to a laugh. "Did she bring Gerald?" "Gerald has a windowsill. He's adapted." "Good." A beat. "She sounds—" Victoria paused. "I'm looking forward to meeting her." He'd been waiting for that sentence, not impatiently, just aware of the fact that it hadn't been said yet, and knowing that when Victoria said a thing like that, it meant she'd thought about it carefully, and was saying it because she meant it, and was ready for what it implied. "She'll like you," he said. "You don't know that." "I know Nora. She likes people who are specific. She has no patience for vague. You are the least vague person I've ever met." A pause. "That is simultaneously a compliment and something else." "Most true things are." He heard her shift on her end of the line, heard the sound of her moving through the house, the creak of the floor near the kitchen that he could have placed blindfolded. "The Portland Business Journal piece runs in 2 weeks," she said. "They sent the photo proofs today." He waited. This was significant, and she was approaching it carefully, which meant it needed space. They did them well," she said. "The photographer was someone Ruth recommended. She worked with me on... She was patient about the light, about the angles. She did not try to hide anything, but she also didn't... A breath. She shot it in a way that was simply honest. This is a person. This is her face. This is her office, and her work, and her life. How do you feel about them?" A long pause. "Like they're mine," Victoria said finally. "Like they're actually me and not a managed version of me. And that is, I don't have a clean feeling about it. It's a complicated feeling. But underneath the complicated feeling is something that might be..." She stopped. "Relief is the closest word." "That sounds right," he said. "I'm not certain I'm ready for what happens when 300,000 people see those photographs." "You don't have to be ready for all 300,000 at once," he said. "You just have to be ready for the issue to run." She was quiet for a moment. "How do you do that?" she said. "Do what?" "Make the scale of things smaller without making the things themselves smaller. You do it consistently. I notice it." He thought about that. "I think it comes from having a kid," he said. "Nora can't process, your whole life is going to be hard sometimes. She can process, today is hard, and we're going to get through today." I started thinking that way, and it turned out to apply to most things. A silence that was comfortable in the specific way silences between them had become. Not empty, but full. The kind of quiet that has quality to it. "I'd like to see you this weekend," she said. It was stated with a slight effort, the way she stated things that required her to cross a small threshold. "I'd like that too." "Nora as well," she said. If you think that's the right time." He thought about it genuinely, not to perform consideration, but because it deserved actual thought. "Yeah," he said. "I think it is." They met on Sunday afternoon at a park near the river, which was Victoria's suggestion, and which surprised him slightly. Not the river, but the public nature of it, the fact that she'd proposed somewhere open rather than the controlled environment of the house. He took it as information about where she currently was, how much the territory had expanded. It was cold, the particular dry cold of Portland in December, when the rain takes a brief break and leaves the air very clean and the sky very gray and the river very still. Nora was wearing her purple coat and a hat with an ear on each side that Carol had given her, and she was carrying Gerald because she decided he needed fresh air, which Gerald apparently had communicated through means she alone had access to. They arrived first. Victoria arrived 8 minutes later. He watched her come through the park gate from a distance, recognizing her walk, the deliberate quality of it, her coat dark against the pale winter light. She saw them, and something in her posture shifted, not toward caution, but toward a kind of careful attention, the way you move when something matters. Nora looked up from where she'd been examining a particularly interesting rock near the path. She looked at Victoria. Then she looked at Liam. Then back at Victoria. "Hi," Nora said, with the bluntness of a 5-year-old, which was a kind of kindness, actually. No performance, no throat clearing, just the thing itself. Victoria looked at her. He could see her recalibrate. She was used to adults, used to the particular social codes of professional contexts, and Nora was entirely outside those codes and made no effort to enter them. "Hi," Victoria said. "This is Gerald," Nora said, extending the elephant. Victoria looked at Gerald. The stuffed elephant regarded her from its one good eye with whatever stuffed elephants have instead of judgment. "Hello, Gerald," she said, with a seriousness that matched Nora's exactly. Nora approved of this immediately. Liam could see it. The fractional nod she gave when someone had met a standard she hadn't stated. She tucked Gerald back under her arm. "Do you know about rocks?" she asked Victoria. Victoria looked at the rock Nora had been examining. "Somewhat." "This one has a stripe," Nora showed her. "Gerald says it's important." "Striped rocks usually are," Victoria said. She crouched down to look at it at Nora's level, which was something Liam noticed, that she didn't stay standing and look down, that she came to where the child was. "The stripe is probably quartz. It's a different mineral than the rest of the rock." Nora looked at her with the direct and slightly alarming attention she gave to information she found interesting. "How do they get in there?" "The rock cracked a very long time ago, and the quartz filled the crack," Victoria said. "Slowly. Over a long time. The crack became part of the rock." Nora considered this. Then she held the rock out. "You can have it." Victoria looked at the rock in the child's outstretched hand, then at Liam. He gave her nothing. This was hers to navigate. She looked back at Nora. "Thank you," she said, and took it. She held it for the rest of the afternoon. They walked along the river path for an hour, Nora moving the way 5-year-olds move, never quite where you expect her to be, ranging out and returning, stopping to investigate things and then catching up at a run. Victoria walked beside Liam, their breath visible in the cold air, and they talked in the way that had become natural to them, not constantly, not filling all the space, but with the ease of people who have established a rhythm and no longer need to manage it. Nora, toward the end of the walk, took Victoria's free hand, just reached up and took it, the way children do when they've decided a person is acceptable, without ceremony, without asking, as a simple statement of fact. Victoria looked down at Nora's hand in hers, and then looked straight ahead at the river, and her expression did something that was private and significant, and not for Liam to name, though he saw it. He looked at the river. He thought about quartz filling cracks, about how long it took, about how the filling became part of the rock, inseparable from it, and how you couldn't look at the rock afterward and say which part was original and which part was repair, because by then it was just the rock, just the whole of it, just what it was. December moved. The imprint launch date came closer. Victoria's editor Ruth visited from New York for 2 days. A woman of 62 who walked into the Sterling house like she owned the conceptual territory of it, and looked at Liam over dinner with the eyes of someone running a very specific assessment, and then said to Victoria, in front of him, "He's better than the last one in every quantifiable way," which was Ruth's version of approval and which Victoria received with the expression of someone trying not to show that they're pleased. The Business Journal piece ran on the 14th of December. Victoria sent him the link at 7 a.m. with no message, just the link. He read it over his first cup of coffee while Nora ate toast and conducted a quiet conversation with Gerald about the day's schedule. The piece was good. It was genuinely, cleanly good. The journalist had understood what she was writing about, had written Victoria as someone with a vision and a history and a sustained and specific intelligence, not as a curiosity, not as a story of overcoming. The photographs were exactly what Victoria had described, honest, unfussy. A woman in her office surrounded by books and manuscript pages, looking directly at the camera because she'd decided to. In the lead photograph, she was standing by the window in the office Liam recognized, the city behind her hair down, her scar visible in the light, her expression that of someone who has reached some internal agreement with the fact of being looked at. He texted back, "It's exactly right. You look like yourself." 3 minutes later. That was the objective. And then, after a pause, Ruth cried, "Don't tell her I told you." He laughed into his coffee. "Your secret," he texted back. The imprint launch in January was a different kind of event than the Blackwood Summit. Smaller, more deliberate, the guest list curated rather than comprehensive. Authors, booksellers, a handful of press, the Marsh Global team. Several of the financial partners whose attitude toward Victoria had shifted measurably after the keynote. Victoria had planned it herself, down to the specific order in which the debut novelist's work would be introduced. The 26-year-old author was there. A small woman with nervous hands and extraordinary stillness when she was actually talking. The kind of stillness that meant she was saying exactly what she meant. And when Victoria introduced her to the room, she talked about the cover letter that had almost gotten the manuscript rejected, and then about what was actually in the manuscript. And the author looked at Victoria from across the room with an expression that was too large to contain. And Victoria looked back, and something passed between them that Liam understood to be one person fully recognizing another across whatever distance had previously existed between them. He stood at the back of that room the way he'd stood at the back of the room at the Blackwood Summit, and he thought that this was what she was for. This specific thing, the finding of voices and the creation of the conditions under which they could be heard. It was a smaller heroism than the kind that gets named publicly, but it was real, and it was hers, and she did it with more integrity than most people brought to the things they were supposed to be for. Afterward in the car, Nora between them in the back seat, Liam had brought her because the launch was on a Saturday and there was no other arrangement, and Victoria had said immediately that it was fine. Nora fell asleep somewhere on the Burnside Bridge with her head tilted against the window and Gerald resting on her lap. Victoria was looking at the sleeping child with an expression he'd seen developing over the weeks since the park, since the striped rock, since Nora had established a habit of calling the Sterling house the tree house and asking, with increasing frequency, when they were going to visit it. "Called me Tori today," Victoria said quietly, "at the reception. She couldn't quite get the full name." "I know, I heard. I didn't—" She paused. "I didn't correct her. I noticed." She looked at Nora for a moment longer. Something in her face had the quality it sometimes had in unguarded moments. The look of someone standing at the edge of something large and finding that it isn't quite as terrifying as they'd been certain it would be. "She's going to need a consistent— if we're going to—" Victoria started and stopped. She had the particular verbal difficulty she got when the thing she was trying to say mattered enough that the wrong word was genuinely dangerous. "I'm not good at things by halves," she said. "I told you that. If Nora is—" A breath. "I can't be a peripheral person in her life. I wouldn't know how to do it that way. So if this is what it is, it needs to be whole," he said. She looked at him. "Yes." "Victoria," he said. She waited. "I'm not asking you to be a peripheral person," he said. I haven't been thinking about you that way since about the third week of November." The car moved over the bridge. Below them, the river was dark and silver in the January night. "I'm afraid of this," she said. It was a straightforward statement, not a plea, not an apology, just the truth laid down without decoration. "I want you to know that. I'm doing it anyway, but I'm afraid." "I know," he said. "You're not afraid." "I didn't say that." She looked at him. "I'm afraid of different things," he said. "Of not being enough. Of Nora losing another person she's gotten attached to. Of you deciding, somewhere down the line, that the complicated version of this isn't worth it." He looked at the road. "I'm afraid of all of it. I'm also here. Fear and being here are not mutually exclusive." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "they're not." In February, the Marsh Global Partnership was formally signed. The debut novelist's book, which had a title now, The Long Water, went into production with a publication date set for the following autumn. Marcus Hale called to say he'd written the first 60 pages of the better book, and they were the best 60 pages he'd ever written, and he was terrified and grateful, which was, Victoria said, the correct response to writing the right thing. The article generated more responses than any piece Sterling House had been connected to in years. Emails to the office, letters to Victoria directly, messages from readers and writers and people who had no professional connection to publishing whatsoever, who had simply seen a photograph of a woman looking directly at a camera and felt something about it that they wanted to say. Victoria read everyone. She didn't respond to all of them. There were too many. But she read them, and Liam found her one evening with a small stack of the printed out emails set aside separately, And when he asked about them, she said without inflection, "These are from people who have scars." He didn't ask anything else. He sat beside her and she let him, which was answer enough. The apartment on Thurman evolved. Nora's court system expanded to include Henry the Fern as a fully rehabilitated citizen, following a trial that lasted several days and resulted in acquittal on all charges on the grounds that the evidence was inconclusive. Gerald remained chief witness and had been given, in absentia, an honorary position on the judicial bench. The east-facing window caught the February light and distributed it across Nora's floor in a way that she spent considerable time arranging herself to sit in. They spent weekends at the Sterling house often enough that Nora had a drawer there. Victoria had offered it without announcement, had simply shown it to Nora one afternoon and said, "For things you need to leave here." And Nora had regarded this drawer with the gravity of a significant appointment and had placed in it 2 crayons, a library book she was in the middle of, a small ceramic owl she'd found at a market and claimed, and a spare button eye for Gerald because, she explained, the house needed a guardian. Victoria had looked at the button eye in the drawer. Then she'd looked at Liam with an expression that was past the almost smile and past the small private one and had become something he didn't have a precise name for, except that it was fully open and it was hers. Spring came to Portland the way it usually does. Gradually, then suddenly, the Douglas firs that surrounded the Sterling house throwing new growth at their tips that was a lighter green than the rest, almost yellow in certain lights. The jays returned to the branch wars with renewed commitment. The garden behind the house, which had been bare and winter still since Liam arrived, revealed itself to be more than he'd realized. There were things planted there that had been waiting, bulbs and perennials that came up in March and April with the slight shock of things that had been there all along, invisible, and were simply now making themselves known. It was on a Saturday in late April that Liam found the house. Not the Sterling house, his own, or what became his own eventually, after the lease was signed and the paperwork done and the very real and very adult logistics sorted out in the way logistics have to be sorted. A house on the northeast side, close to a good school, with a yard that faced the river in the distance and a front porch that caught the afternoon light. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faced west, a room with good natural light that a person could use as an office. He took Victoria to see it before he signed anything. He wasn't sure, going in, whether this was the right move, whether it was too much, too presumptuous, whether it assumed things that hadn't been explicitly stated. But they'd had the conversation in the car in January, the whole and not by halves conversation, and he operated on the belief that people who've said the hard things deserve to be treated as having said them. She walked through the house without saying much. He walked behind her and let her look the way he'd learned to let her take time with things that mattered. She stood at the kitchen window for a while. She went up the stairs and stood in the doorway of each room, looking at it carefully, the way she looked at a manuscript she was considering, not for what it currently was, but for what it was capable of being. She came back downstairs. She stood in the front room, afternoon light coming through the west-facing windows, and looked at the space. "The office," she said. "Upstairs. 2nd room. I was thinking the same thing. The light is correct." "Yeah." She looked at the kitchen. "The window needs a plant. Henry's been looking for a bigger space." The corner of her mouth moved. "Nora will want to repaint something," she said. "She'll have opinions about the color of her room." "Strong ones," he agreed. Victoria looked at the window, at the light, at the room that was empty and possible. "You should sign it," she said. "I intend to." She turned and looked at him. She was standing in the light, the scar visible on the left side of her face, her eyes very direct, her expression the open one that was still not effortless for her, and probably never would be, but that she chose, increasingly, deliberately, to choose exposure over the management of exposure, to choose presence over the controlled distance that had kept her safe and small for 5 years. She was not a different person than the woman who had opened the door to him on a November night and warned him that no one ever stayed long. She was the same person, with the same precision and the same difficult edges and the same capacity for care that went total rather than partial. She still steeped her tea too long sometimes, though less often. She still lost her reading glasses in obvious places. She still went quiet in the middle of sentences when the right word required longer to find than the sentence expected. The scar was still there. It would always be there. It was part of her face, part of her history, part of the specific and irreducible story of how she had become who she was, which was a woman who built things that mattered, who saw what was worth seeing in people and work, who had needed 5 years to trust that the world could look at her and not find her wanting, and who had decided, without anyone saving her or fixing her or offering her a version of herself that required less courage, to let herself be looked at anyway. Liam looked at her in the afternoon light of the house he was going to sign for, with the river in the distance and the spring coming through the windows, and thought about a crow in a parking lot in Seattle and a condemned apartment and a listing that read like someone who wasn't trying to sell anything. He thought about Nora saying bird at 14 months like it was the most significant discovery ever made, and about the way naming something was sometimes enough to make it real. He thought about what it meant to be a fixed point. He'd thought of it as something he'd been for her, and maybe that was true, but the longer version of the truth was that she'd been one too. Something that didn't move, that he could orient himself around. In a period of his life when everything else was being relocated and reassembled, and he hadn't known until later how much he'd needed something to stay put. They were fixed points for each other. That was the actual thing. "Victoria," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you for opening the door." She was quiet for a moment. The light moved through the room as a cloud shifted somewhere outside. "Thank you," she said, "for knocking." There was nothing performed in it. No music rising underneath, no grand statement to wrap the thing in ceremony it didn't need. Just two people in an empty house on a Saturday afternoon in April, standing in the light, having arrived here by way of a condemned apartment and a late-night kettle, and a striped rock that a 5-year-old gave away because she'd decided the person was worth giving it to. Not a perfect story. No story worth telling actually is. There were hard months that came after, the way hard months always come. The adjustment of lives reshaping themselves around new gravity, the occasional ruptures of two people with strong habits learning where those habits collided, the specific difficulty of a child learning to trust that the new shape of her family was a real one and not a temporary condition. There were nights when Victoria went quiet in ways that took time to find the other side of, and nights when Liam's patience wore through and he said the wrong thing and had to find his way back to it. The work of it was real. It did not simplify. But Nora put the spare button eye in the drawer of the Sterling house, and Henry the fern was transplanted to the new kitchen window, and the east-facing light found new things to illuminate every morning, and the jays and the Douglas firs conducted their ongoing negotiations with the same certainty they'd always had, as if the branch had always belonged to whoever was willing to keep showing up for it. The scar remained part of the story. Of course it did. It always would. It just wasn't the whole of it anymore. That was the thing about cracks and quartz and the long, slow process of what fills the places that were broken open. Eventually, you stop being able to see where the original ended and the repair began. Eventually, it's just the rock. Just the whole of it. Just what it is. And if you hold it up to the light, if you hold any of it up to the light, and look honestly at what's there, what you find is not something diminished by what it survived. What you find is the stripe, right through the center of it, running all the way through, the part that makes it worth keeping.